my pleasure to be here, my second time in Armenia. I'm from Kazakhstan. I was born on the seashore of the Caspian Sea in Akhtal, so we always were speaking about the Middle Corridor, and I think all of you are aware that the Middle Corridor goes through such a wonderful city of Akhtal. And today my presentation is more about, let's say, being like in between, being optimistic and skeptical about the corridors, because I would consider a corridor as a geopolitical pressure instrument. And as we had yesterday discussion in the morning, I think we will speak less about connectivity and more about competition and how different actors use corridors and connectivity to increase its leverage and overall influence over Eurasian affairs. So today, speaking more about Nightingale. So Nightingale, it's a political consultancy, and we also try to provide some foresight for different clients, mostly businesses. And we had like an issue of making a forecast by using different methods, including AI and data, big data approach, that always there's a link which we were missing into the concept through which Nightingale perceives like global events and which would really help Nightingale to make some foresights. So in that sense, we came up with an idea of having geoconnectivity, an approach which tries to understand links between different events which take place in Eurasia. And in that sense, we also called this my presentation today, Geoconnectivity and the Death of Eurasia. In the sense that we have different links, and they led to, let's say, you can see on the map here, Iran, Afghanistan, and there were so many considerations of Central Asian states to expand their multi-vector foreign policy by having access to ports of Iran or Pakistan to make and increase its trade with the Gulf states, for example, or even like with Pakistan. For example, Pakistan is almost how much, like 300 million population, and our trade with Pakistan maybe like might exceed 1 billion of USD. Why? Because we don't have sustainable links which connect Central Asia and South Asia, and also with a wider region of Gulf states and also Eastern Africa. You can see here on the map that, for example, roads which go through Iran or Afghanistan right now are closed. I mean, in the case of Iran, we can I mean, you know it, but does anyone know the reason why the road via Afghanistan is closed so far?
But is it closed? What about the railway between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan?
So the issue is that we can't use the territory of Afghanistan to reach the territory of Pakistan because the border is closed since October last year. There was also some accusations from Pakistan side that Afghanistan is supporting terrorist organization on the territory of Pakistan in terms of, I mean, we're mostly speaking about ISIS Khorasan and other organizations which increase their activities on the territory of Pakistan. So in that sense, I mean, we had a ripple effect on Central Asian states which also decrease the potential to increase trade with, I mean, larger markets of Pakistan. So you can also see in the map some other linkages. You see like the northern Caspian was attacked, and also Bandar Anzali port of Iran, which was also attacked by Israel because of the assumptions that there's some weapons which are being shipped from Russia to Iran by using Caspian maritime and also ships. And in that sense, we see that the Middle Corridor is still like one of the links, which is the most sustainable one. But there are also some issues in terms of geopolitics, which also possess threat for this corridor. And overall, like by using this approach of geoconnectivity, we were able, for example, to make several quite successful forecasts, for example, about asymmetric wars in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. As US started striking against Iran, there was increase of oil prices. And this led also to increase of Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil and gas facilities. And that is the reason why also, for example, critical road for Kazakhstan called CPC, Caspian Consortium, was also attacked by Ukraine. Kazakh oil doesn't go anymore through Druzhba to Germany. It was also halted because of attacks from Ukrainian side on Russia's energy infrastructure. And in that sense, you see that this different connections, like strikes against Iran led to decrease of Kazakh oil exports to European Union. At the same time, there's another port which is called Haifa. I can show you here also in Israel. This one was also attacked by Israel, and as you know, Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan together, they supply up to 70% of total Israel oil imports. So in that sense, that Kazakhstan, which isn't participant of neither of the war in Ukraine nor of the war in Iran, is caught between two wars and has difficulties to export its oil either to Middle Eastern countries or to European states. So you see here also some numbers. There was Ukrainian attacks and from Iran and Hezbollah missile strikes on this critical infrastructure. Here's another example of a foresight which we were trying to make, that there's, since due to the closure of the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, Uzbekistan even became almost one of the most important trade partners of Afghanistan and could even exceed volume of exports of Pakistan to Afghanistan. Just for you to imagine, Uzbek-Afghan border is only like maybe 170 kilometers long. Pakistan-Afghanistan border is almost 1,500 kilometers long. So it's 10 times longer than the border between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. But the closure of the border led to more integration of Afghanistan into the Central Asia. And even Uzbekistan's stance is that Afghanistan is an integral part of Central Asia. So speaking about all these considerations of Turkic world and so on, there are some other events which take place in Central Asia and I think which have even more influence on the regionalization of Central Asia. So as you might see, like following the strikes on the Afghan-Pakistan border, there was a first inaugural Central Asia-Afghanistan consultative dialogue which took place in Afghanistan. So a kind of new C5+1 between Central Asia and Afghanistan on the level of deputy head of Ministry of Foreign Affairs or also at the level of ambassadors. So we would like to speak, like based on the geoconnectivity approach, we are considering three major trends which might take place in Central Asia and which will also reshape its geopolitics. So the first one is Russia, and Russia increasing its cooperation with Iran and Afghanistan, and this might have a ripple effect on strengthening Russia's influence in South Caucasus and Central Asia. It's about China and Central Asia becoming an integral part of China's stability. And also it's Afghanistan, which is also becoming a part of Central Asia. So I don't have here anything about also Turkic world. So as a Central Asian, I see like mostly like these trends which really like have influence on events which take place in Central Asia. And here you have also a slide on how Russia and Iran might really strengthen their relationships. So you see here first different roads which increase the trade between Russia and Iran. And from my perspective, Russia was at least maybe the leading ally or at least partner of Iran amidst the war in the Middle East. And I think like as the war will end up, for Iran, they will really struggle to recover relationships with Gulf states, with any other states which were attacked, maybe accidentally, from the territory of Iran. And in that sense, we will observe like this strengthening of trade relationships between Russia and Iran. Even before the sanctions were imposed, like this relationship was quite minimal between Russia and Iran. And actually, the situation of sanction regime against the two countries has led to strengthening of partnerships. So you know, like there are actually two regions which are between Russia and Iran. It's mostly Central Asia and South Caucasus. And for Russia, it will be critical to build also infrastructure to be able to have partnership with Iran. And you see the second picture 2 days ago, there was for the first time, I think, and it's quite surprising, there was a deal signed between Russia and Afghanistan to cooperate on military to certain military cooperation between Russia and Afghanistan. So I think this is also quite surprising. So as we're speaking about Russia and Iran, I think we should also consider like these developments in the relationships between Russia and Afghanistan. So from our perspective and how Russia can really use the situation in Iran to threaten its influence in South Caucasus and Central Asia, from my perspective, and I hope that my colleagues from Iran who might see this video will not be offended, but Iran might really become more unpredictable. If US will not lift sanctions against Iran, some new protests in 2-3 months might actually take place in Iran again. And as you remember this connection of protests It was first of all protests, and they were followed by US strikes against Iran. And if this situation will not recover, economic situation in Iran, it means that the new protests might start again, and that the status of strikes, so that Iran and Israel, US and Israel can always relaunch the strikes against Iran if there are some new protests which will take place in the country. So you can see here a chart. We just gathered information from ACLED on latest protests and a wave of protests. So you see that following different events, also strikes which took place last year, there was again a rise of protests in the country. So in that sense, even having an external enemy doesn't always help to preserve situation and to prevent a new rise of protests in the country. So if Iran and US will not reach a deal in which US might really lift or decrease its economic pressure on Iran, we might assume that some new protests might take place and that Iran and Israel might, US and Israel might support protesters and relaunch their attacks on the country. In that sense, you know, like during this latest strikes, there were also strike on Azerbaijan. Last year, by the way, during this 12 days war, there was one drone accidentally crossing the territory of Kazakhstan from Iran, which we found also in Mangostau region. So in that sense, there are some other things to consider. For example, here's a statement from Ayatollah Khamenei, and he argued that there were some studies conducted to identify other fronts where the enemy has minimal experience and would be extremely vulnerable. And at that sense, you know, like there's, in Iranian surrounding, there's also Kazakhstan. And during the strikes, there was a visit of Israeli president to Kazakhstan and also Kazakh attention to join Abraham Accords. And I had an opportunity to talk to some Iranian colleagues who also argued that there was quite negative, let's say, in Oriental manner, quite negative perception of the events which took place in Kazakhstan. Overall, Kazakhstan, in comparison to, let's say, even to Azerbaijan or to any other Central Asian states, was the most, let's say, negative stance on the war in Iran. So there was the president didn't sign a letter of condolences. Azerbaijani leader, Tajik leader, Uzbek leader signed a letter of condolences after the death of Khamenei. There was also Kazakhstan didn't, I think, congratulate also the new leader with his appointment, but some other states of Central Asia did it. And also there were some statements about insufficiency of Iranian political regime from a Kazakh president during referendum in March 2026. So why did it happen? From my perspective, we have in the Caspian part of Kazakhstan a huge number of oil deposits which are being operated by American and British companies. And in that sense, I think Kazakhstan has a fear that as Iran launch attacks against Gulf states, which are close partners to American and Western companies, might also happen to Kazakhstan, given to this geographic proximity. And as another issue, as you know, there was a long debate on division of the Caspian Sea between 5 states. So they came up and they signed this convention of the Caspian Sea 2018. And there's the only one state which hasn't ratified this convention yet. Which state is it? It's Iran. So given the current situation, there were a demand from Iran. I mean, before this convention was signed in 2018, Iran demanded 20% of the Caspian Sea as its own share. According to convention, Iran's share is only like 11 or 13%. So Iran hasn't ratified this document yet. It means that Iran hasn't joined these terms. And given the blockade of Strait of Hormuz, that Iran might have some difficulties to ship its oil to China or to any other state because of US blocking it, it means that this is assets, oil assets in the northern part of the Caspian Sea gain strategic value for Iran and also for its reserves to be able to have some other sources of oil. So I can just give you a comparison. So 2018, as this convention was signed, as you know, there was reintroduction of sanctions against Iran by Trump. He reimposed the sanctions. And this led actually to softening Iranian position on signing this convention. They wanted to warm up relationships with all Caspian states, and they decided to sign this document. Right now, there's debate in Iran that this was actually a mistake to sign this document. And there's some debates, even it really makes sense for Iran to ratify this document. In this scenario, there were even some disputes, for example, between Iran and Turkmenistan, 2009, over oil deposits in the Caspian Sea. So from our perspective, if some new strikes might be launched, I think this topic will really gain some new importance. It was expected to have a summit with Iran and with all 5 Caspian states in Tehran, August this year. So as I might assume, the summit will not take place. So given the situation in the Middle East, Iran might really change its position and still keep demanding 20% of the Caspian Sea to have this alternative sources of oil, and also a possibility maybe to ship it to China from Iran. Here's another issue of how Russia, actually there was also a statement from Lavrov regarding this 2035, and he also asked Iran to speed up ratifying this document. What didn't happen, what hasn't happened yet. And there's another issue of Afghanistan. So we have already considered Iran and how Russia might really use the situation in Iran to increase its leverage and influence in Central Asia and South Caucasus by being an actor which has influence over Iran and over its unpredictability. In the case of US, will refuse to lift the sanctions against the country. There's another issue of strikes on Tajik-Afghan border. For example, last year there were 5, I think, Chinese nationals or 3 Chinese nationals killed on Tajik-Afghan border. There were some new attempts to cross the border, I think, this year, January. And because of it happening, there was a new program, adopted by the CSTO, by the way. I don't know if Armenia is a part of a program to strengthen the Tajik-Afghan border, but there also was a request from Tajik side to increase its cooperation with Russia in terms of security because of worsening situation on the Tajik-Afghan border. And here you should also take into account the issue of Russia, which is signing this document of military technical cooperation. In that sense, Russia will also exchange information on the activity of terrorist organization with the Taliban. So they will have access to this type of information, which they might also exchange with Central Asian states, which still feel some threat arising from the territory of Afghanistan. In that sense, I think there's a recalibration of Russia's policy by having this transactional approach, having Afghanistan and Iran as also natural partners maybe to increase its presence in South Caucasus and Central Asia. And coming to the second trend of Central Asia becoming a part of China's stability, you can see that China was always trying to avoid the Strait of Malacca. As you know, the strategy of Malacca is also a quite prominent concept. They invested up to $20 billion into CPEC. It's China-Pakistan economic corridor. There was also intention to use the corridors through Afghanistan, through Iran, and also there's a civil war in Myanmar, an attempt to have a corridor through the territory of Myanmar. So far, you see the closure, sometimes there's a closure of Poland-Belarus border, which also led to, issues of China exporting its goods through the middle corridor, also the northern corridor to European Union. There's issue with the TRIPP corridor. It's still unclear what's Chinese stance on this matter, and whether China will overall use this corridor. There's issue with Pakistan and also using Pakistan's territory to, avoid the Strait of Malacca, to be less dependent on US, and also there was calculations to maybe use also Iranian ports and corridor to reach maybe European countries or Gulf states, whatever, to circumvent the strategy of the dilemma of Malacca. So Central Asian states are the safest spot for China to increase its economic cooperation. There was also, even in Mongolia, the case that there was second line under construction of railway, which would also enable for China to purchase cheaper coal. But there was some protests in Mongolia, which led to state de cap, to change of government. So Central Asia, in that sense, is a stable island for China to increase its cooperation. And I just give you some numbers. We all speak about C5+1. Do you know how many formats China has on ministerial level with Central Asian states? 13. it started with only meetings at the level of ministers of foreign affairs. 2023, there was the first summit, China-Central Asia. Now they have a secretariat, China-Central Asia, with 16 employees, 8 from China, 8 from all 4 Central Asian states, excluding Turkmenistan. And there's also 13 different formats of cooperation. For example, recently there was a meeting of ministers of public security, China, Central Asia, and in that sense, China will really try to increase cooperation in such sectors as security and military with Central Asian states. There was always an initiative of Xi Jinping to exchange intelligence information, for example, between Central Asia and China. It was proposed during the SCO summit, I think, in Astana 2 years ago. Here you can see also some other numbers. For example, there was 2 summits, China, Central Asia. The first one was in Xi'an, second one was in Astana. And if we compare topics which were mentioned by Xi Jinping during the first and second summit, you will see that there is increase of the topic security, which Xi Jinping was also emphasizing in cooperation with Central Asian states. So as I have already spoken about, there were 3 or 5 Chinese nationals killed on Tajik-Afghan border by a drone which appeared from Afghan territory. And in that sense, given the situation in the world, China will really might have an idea to strengthen its partnership with Central Asia. Central Asia is now a half of total trade of Xinjiang. So there's also Turkmenistan, which supplies up to 10% of Chinese total gas imports. And was a deal recently, by the way, following the war in Iran, which was signed between China and Turkmenistan on Galkanash. It's, I think, one of the biggest gas field worldwide, to even increase its import from safe countries of gas. And there are some talks about increasing Kazakh oil exports to China. So in that sense, China and Central Asia, they really pursue integration of, let's say, 2 regions. And I have already spoken about secretariat and all the different ministerial meetings. Yes, here's one of the examples. It took place 18th of May. Following the situation in Iran, there was a meeting between ministers of interior and public security. And the last point, and the last trend which I spoke about, it's of course Afghanistan becoming a part of Central Asia. So we were speaking about Azerbaijan and C6 format. I can just give you an example. I think trade between Central Asia and Afghanistan is 2 times higher than trade between Central Asia and Azerbaijan, just for your note. So there's some other processes which take place in Central Asia. It's not only about OTS and Turkic war, but it's also about Russia, China, Afghanistan, and the change of the approach to the region. So right now, Central Asia is actually also the region which provides security for Afghanistan. So as the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan is closed, as the disruptions of Iranian exports to Afghanistan, and Iran used to be the main trade partner of Afghanistan, the Central Asia states which supply up to 90% of Afghanistan's electricity imports. There's also Central Asia which supply oil and gas and all other different, for example, flour, wheat, and all other most important goods for the population of Afghanistan. And in that sense, Afghanistan is even becoming more dependent on Central Asian states and also on stability in this region. So we have integrated several dimensions at our geoconnectivity approach, and I try to explain you major trends which we actually outline given this approach. We have networks through which shocks across the borders. As you remember, the situation in Iran led to Kazakhstan decreasing its oil exports because Ukraine increased attacks on Russian gas and oil infrastructure, because Russia could really benefit from the increase of oil prices. There's also sectoral, that we see these linkages between energy, agriculture, food security, and there's also some temporal triggers in the approach of geoconnectivity. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you.
There's also LinkedIn of Nightingale, so you can follow us also.
Thank you, Eldanis. Thank you very much. I want to ask our colleagues to be back, please. And as you are coming, I will give one question to Mr. Husseinov. Thank you very much for this very interesting topic. You have spoken about interconnectivity and the depth of this interconnectivity in Eurasian geopolitics. And you have mentioned about the challenges and limitations. You have made great points, of course. But I have also question about opportunities. Of course, you have mentioned about also some moments, but what kind of free opportunities are bringing these all challenges, war in Ukraine, war in Iran and other places for Central Asia and Central Asia? Which free points will you make? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think the first point, it's an importance to promote Central Asia and South Caucasus as a region of stability and peace. And I hope that this peace process will really speed up and Azerbaijan and Armenia will sign this peace agreement to unlock infrastructure. So I think we should really think of promoting together Central Asia and South Caucasus as a region of stability within instability. It's my first point. Second point is, of course, being a place where major powers can really connect. So we should really speak of corridors not as a tool of geopolitical pressure or competition, but corridors as a tool of connecting these major powers. Was an example of Armenia, which was like a connection between EU and Russia in trade. So Russia goods going to Europe through Armenia and vice versa, from Europe through Armenia to Russia. And the last point, I think, overall, this corridors really, I think, strengthened just understanding of both regions. So right now we speak about Heartland here at the conference. So given this corridors, this hard infrastructure led also to the soft infrastructure in terms of experts gathering together and speaking. So I think we should really making maybe a concept of Central Asia, South Caucasus, stability within instability, in that sense, that the region where you can really cooperate, where you come and you can make business with Russia, with China, with Europe, Gulf states, whoever, despite you have maybe confrontation in different regions.
Thank you very much for your constructive answer and recommendation. And my next question is for Professor Kasenova. Thank you for your speech. And yesterday we were also discussing about the role of Kazakhstan, and this country as an example for others. And recently Kazakhstan is also promoting the vision of standing a middle power, which is very important for Central Asia and also South Caucasus. But when we are speaking something like this about example, about standing middle power, I am going back to 4 years ago when demonstration and this kind of clashes and sad things were happening in Kazakhstan, and only after Russian involvement this problem was solved. So we will have also presidential elections, if I am not mistaken, in Kazakhstan. And what kind of recommendations will you give to the Kazakhstan that they do not have the same thing and in the future? So what is your take on this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, you refer to the 2022 January events, and they are a bit more complicated. And indeed, the Russian involvement. We had protests. Probably some of you might be familiar, some might not. But we had protests in Kazakhstan at the very beginning of 2022, and they were triggered by increases in the prices of diesel fuel. They started in Western Kazakhstan, very quickly spread across the country, and the biggest protest took place in the city of Almaty, which is the commercial capital. It used to be the capital of Kazakhstan prior to 1997, and these were really mass protests. And then, President Tokayev called on CSTO, and CSTO sent peacekeepers, and peacekeepers arrived, and basically, the unrest was, they dealt with the unrest, but not peacekeepers. So this is sort of the kind of on the surface. That's the storyline, but it's more complicated. Why we had mass protests? Because actually there was an attempted coup, and the crowds, kind of the mob mobilized in Almaty. These were people men from bazaars that were kind of linked to criminal groups, but also linked to the people kind of at the top of the political ladder, political pyramid, and they were ultimately linked to the nephews of President Nazarbayev, and also to the head of the security services. So there was an attempted coup. It seems that former President Nazarbayev's family members and associates got impatient. We kind of thought that President Tokayev, who was appointed to the position, he was the official successor, was a temporary figure. So unlike Azerbaijan, President Nazarbayev didn't have a son to inherit to inherit the crown. So he had 3 daughters and also sons-in-law, and all of them very, very problematic. So anyways, it seems it was a temporary solution, but people got impatient and they attempted to squeeze him out. He was kind of offered to go, but he decided to stay. Okay, and he decided to stay, and he said that I'm not stepping down. And now this call, it seems the calling on CSTO, that was kind of the biggest card he had in this competition with the people who were kind of other people in power, who controlled secret services and controlled the police, and that's why we had such major kind of we had violence and robbery and all that, because like in all the police disappeared from the streets. Security services people left also their stations, and with weapons, kind of weapon depots there. So it was important basically for President Tokayev to signal who is in charge, and reaching out to Putin actually was important in this regard. So peacekeepers themselves, when they arrived, they didn't do anything basically. They were positioned to protect important strategic infrastructure, but this strategic infrastructure was not actually in danger. So by the time they arrived, it was going. Like the local security people were already on the streets, and so it was important for signaling. It was important for signaling who is actually in charge in the country. And once it became clear who is in charge in the country, then it sort of was no longer an issue. So having said that. We just had, indeed, President Tokayev promised that he will stay only for 1 term, which ends in 2029, and he needs to prepare the succession. And as we know, political succession in authoritarian systems, that's a big challenge, right? How do you do that? If you genuinely want to leave, you need to organize things fast, right? And we just had the constitutional actual reform, new constitution, right? And it seems some things are becoming clearer, although the major kind of the big question is who will be the vice president. So with this new constitution, we are reviving the position of the vice president. We had a vice president with the first constitution adopted in 1993, and this person, whoever becomes the vice president, is probably the successor, okay? Because once once you if he resigns a little bit earlier, we can imagine this kind of scenario, then new elections should take place within, I think, 2 months. So, which means that the vice president is the next president. There is no way you can have a meaningful, presidential campaign in such a short period of time. So it's very, very they try to keep it very, very controlled. The same is true for the parliamentary elections. We'll have parliamentary elections in August this year, and if you listen to our policymakers, they say, it's so important to have a well-functioning party system, and we haven't had any meaningful, we haven't had any opposition in the parliament, real opposition parties for quite some time, I would say, since probably 2005, 2006. We kind of see that this is approached in a very managed, controlled manner. Like we see the new party and who the members of this party are. So these are people close to the administration. So was the original plan different? Like, if you listen to President Tokayev and people close to him in 2022, he was promising big political reform. Yeah. Was it was it genuine? Was this promise genuine? Maybe partially it was, but whatever political liberalization they had at the beginning, it seems they gave up on them. And the why so? There might be different reasons. I'm not an insider. I don't have access to these people, but the geopolitical situation is one. Yeah, it's so turbulent. You need to control the domestic political space. The second interlinked reason is the fragmentation of the political elites. There is a fear of the revanche of the old guard. Yeah, President Nazarbayev keeps going to Moscow and meeting President Putin to the chagrin of President Tokayev, who is not very talkative on this matter, but he complained a couple of times. That's probably not a good thing to do. So the elites, the old Kazakhstan, although the line between old Kazakhstan and new Kazakhstan is very blurry, they still have major assets. They have billions of dollars. So the Tokayev administration tried to squeeze a little bit, but overall it's very, very difficult to do because these assets are elsewhere. Yeah, and to legally to return them, it's just extremely, extremely difficult and takes time. So there is a fear that if you have more or less decent elections, that will create an opportunity for the old guard to get back in. Plus, we know what Russia is doing when there are opportunities to meddle in the elections. And Russia has a lot of leverage, and we are in Russia's information space, and it's I don't need to elaborate on that. And plus, if before you would do reform, some liberalization to be more acceptable in the West, right? Now there is virtually no pressure from outside, right? You don't need to look good anymore because, look what's happening elsewhere. And yesterday we were saying that it's becoming more and more transactional. It is becoming more and more transactional. Now. Kazakhstan signed a deal on the development of critical minerals, and who is part of the deal? President Trump's sons. So you you offer things, kind of you know how to work, right, with this administration. So why bother? Why bother? Why kind of take a risk and do open up if it's not appreciated? And like if you don't get punished. But that's a very, very long kind of answer to your.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. I think we will continue after. And my next question is for Professor Horak. You have spoken about railway geopolitics in Central Asia, and now there is a new project between China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. Could you be so kind to explain us the impact of this railway and which kind of role it will play in the region? Will it some kind of compete with China-Kazakhstan railway and the part of the Turkmenistan, or it will stand much more complex? Thank you.
So I didn't touch that problem in my presentation because it would widen up the issue. But once you ask, first of all, this project is still being under construction, and the accomplishment of this project is also under the question. There are a lot of technical issues, even political issues on the Kyrgyz side, for example. So it's still not even fully done. The whole route as it will be. We know basically the starting point, we know the ending point, but in between is still under the question. Not all. So it's talking about this China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railway. Is maybe the similar issue as talking about even less actual issue than talking about so-called TRIPP corridor. Yeah, just to think about. But nevertheless, okay, let's speculate a bit. What could bring it to this kind of railway geopolitical market in Central Asia and in Eurasia? Well, yes, it's a new connection. It's a connection that will add on to those existing points on Chinese-Kazakhstani border. I mean, Alashanko on one side and Khorgos on the other side. But the question is, first of all, the question is about, let's say, the capacity of that and the implementation of this capacity. Even if the capacity is high or relatively high, I would say that it will be very difficult, even due to the terrain, due to the field, it would be very difficult to compete with Khorgos, for example. Khorgos is a kind of brand that was quite well established now and relatively smooth. And don't forget one thing, but if you want to bring something from China to Europe, Turkey or somewhere, Kazakhstan is just on one edge of this region and on the other edge. While if you have China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railway, that's fine. But you should go somewhere further. And it means that you need to cross Chinese, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Uzbekistan something borders in order to get to the other side of the issue. Plus, if you look where Kashgar, starting point, is located in westernmost edge of China, it's also some kind of loop that the train has to do. So I don't think that it can become some kind of complementary route for this already established ones. But I wouldn't say that it will be something that will significantly change the game due to physical geography, due to the technical issues, due to the border issues, and political disputes among the countries. These two last points are solvable, much easier than this hardware points, but nevertheless, I wouldn't exaggerate the role of this corridor even once it's accomplished. And we can make a bet now. What will be the first, this one or the TRIPP corridor?
I think this one will be much more faster than TRIPP. Thank you very much. And do we have questions in audience? Please, as first you, after Mabin and.
Okay, my question is: can resource trade infrastructure worsen prospects of democratic reforms in those countries? because roads that transfer raw materials can enrich only small oligarchy elite in those countries, which will deepen the resource course, and like in Russia, where Putin can trade oil and do not care about the interests of population. Can it worsen the prospects of democratic reforms in those countries? That's my question.
I think there is no definitive answer on the resource curse. There is a book by Pauline Jong and somebody else like tackling it. But on the one, I think, kind of on the one hand, yes, there is this link. You have resources. Certain people get rich, and then they are good at keeping they have assets and they can keep power. On the other hand, if you have resources, then population is more well-to-do. They are more interested in education, and that creates more opportunities. You open up, people travel, and they learn middle class, hopefully emerging, and then they promote the change. So that would be my quick take.
Ask Professor Asturian asked to finish, so we need. Yeah, please.
You sure? Okay. Yeah, thank you to the panel. A question for Dr. Gusenov, if I may. A question about death and Eurasia. Because, yes, the wars could be going on. That's very, very relevant. But actually what you said seemed to me to be very optimistic. Right? You were pro-TRIPP and so on, and it sounded like you were pointing out a lot of integration that many of us may not be paying attention to. Central Asia with Afghanistan, Central Asia with China. So is it that Eurasia is changing and that it's going eastwards, or something else?
It depends on your perception of Eurasia, since you're thinking in
So
British
is it the term, or is
America.
it because we have both death and Eurasia? So I'm just wondering,
So all this process
where's
is
the death
happening
and what's,
because of wars which take place and disruptions on
Unquestionably.
traditional roads.
yeah.
That's why it's the death of Eurasia. So the process,
Okay.
like connoting, concentration on Central Asia, South Caucasus, happens because other actors use these corridors to put pressure on each other. And in that sense, we see this connectivity. So we see that people want to use less northern corridor, and they want to reorient on the middle corridor. So you see this connection. And in
That
sense-
absolutely, but I'm just wondering, death and Eurasia together, so is Caucasus, Central Asia not Eurasia?
It's Eurasia, but we speak about
But-
wider Eurasia, right? So it's also Pakistan, Afghanistan is also Eurasia.
Okay.
Civil war in Myanmar, situation in Iran, and also situation on Polish-Belarus border. This is all disruptions. It's actually, we lose all these links which were connecting the whole region. And that's why we are mostly have the single corridor which is operating, which is stable, and I hope it will be stable. But we also should think of maybe making more region connected. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. First, for very interesting. It was back in time for me going through all these roads in Central Asia. But two questions for me. One, the Central Asia as a totality of 5 countries, plus Afghanistan at some point maybe, could it become like a region by itself? Is there enough centripetal forces to bring pieces together? Because from one side, we discuss Russian underbelly, post-Soviet memories, CSTO, Eurasian Economic, Turkic world expansion, China, Shanghai Cooperation Group, etc. So different configurations, but at the same time, for me, the same question I have for South Caucasus also, and I spoke about South Caucasus potential unity. How much there is a Central Asian forces of gravity to keep things together? This was my first question. Second is shorter one, about, no? Okay.
One is okay.
Okay, one is enough.
Okay, I think there is a region. I think there is a region, and there are the centripetal forces since the very beginning, even prior to the collapse. We had consultative meetings, started having consultative meetings of 5 before the dissolution, when it became clear that, okay, we need to stick together and do things together. There are also centrifugal, forces, but I think now we kind of have the most serious chance to actually pull it off. But there's kind of so much room, for improvement, and Turkmenistan is kind of, there are no even direct flights. Like to go from Ashgabat to Almaty, you need to fly to Istanbul. Like, doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Or Abu Dhabi, So, so I think it's getting together, and that's why they even travel now as five, C5. So trying to show more unity, regional unity. So I keep all my fingers crossed. Let's hope, and we are in a better situation than the South Caucasus in this regard. But it's a precarious moment. That would be mine.
Well, many years ago, when I started my academic career, I wrote a kind of article dealing with this eventual unifying aspects of Central Asia. Okay, that might happen, but under the auspice of some outside player. Now I am happy that I was wrong, and actually it seems to me that Central Asia now has a very unique chance, as you said, to not fully integrate with each other. It's not we will not see some kind of Central Eurasian Union as kind of EU. Probably not. But even these top-down processes are promising. I think there are two, one positive and one perspective thing that might enhance that point. First, unlike Central Asia, unlike Caucasus, there are much less animosities in between the countries. And the perspective issue is Central Asians need to know about each other more. It's a very wide gap, I would see, that when I asked my students in Tashkent, have you been to Kazakhstan? Most of them, they said no. When I asked people in Kazakhstan, have you been to, we were to Samarkand, Bukhara, probably some of them. But have you been to Tajikistan? No. No, I don't speak about Turkmenistan, stays a little bit aside. But I think that this is this kind of, let's say, soft tools that might somehow be worked out through these consultative meetings or some other platforms might really happen to make the region together once it's somehow created or constructed by geopoliticians, political scientists, politicians and others.
Okay. Sur ce, there was a reference to death, which is a very positive thing. Just some French poetry for you. Very filled with hope. C'est la mort qui fait vivre, hélas, et qui console. C'est le but de la vie et c'est l'unique espoir qui, comme un élixir, nous montre et nous enivre et nous donne la force de marcher jusqu'au soir. Baudelaire, and let's take...
Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished speakers, colleagues, guests. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the final panel of this wonderful conference, The Return of the Great Game. So over the past 2 days, we have had the opportunity to examine geopolitical and geoeconomic development from multiple perspectives. As the structure of this conference, very well designed by Professor Asturian itself demonstrates, our discussions have gradually expanded in scope. And we began yesterday in the morning, we began with a focus on individual countries and the South Caucasus, moved to the broader regional perspectives that included Iran, Turkey, Middle East, etc., and have now arrived at the level of major powers and their competing visions for the heartland. This progression has highlighted an important reality that local developments cannot be fully understood without considering regional dynamics, and regional dynamics cannot be discussed or analyzed without having this broad geopolitical scope in our minds. With that, it's my pleasure to open our our last panel, and we have a very small change in our program, in our agenda, because Professor Lieven is going to present his work via Zoom. We will start with his presentation, and then we'll move to our other speakers. Dr. Anatol Lieven is going to present his work entitled The Difficulty of Building Stable Hegemony in the Southern Caucasus and West Asia. Dr. Lieven is the director of the Eurasian program and the Andrew Besavich Chair in American Diplomatic History at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He was formerly a professor at Georgetown University in Qatar and in War Studies Department in King's College, London. He also served as a member of the Advisory Committee of the South Asian Department of the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office and of the Academic Board of the Valdai Discussion Club in Russia. He holds a BA and PhD in History and Political Science from Cambridge University in England. From 1985 to 1998, Professor Lieven worked as a journalist in South Asia, the former Soviet Union, and Eastern Europe, and covered the wars in Afghanistan, Chechnya, and the Southern Caucasus. From 2000 to 2007, he worked at think tanks in Washington, D.C. Dr. Lieven is author of several books on Russia and its neighbors, including the Baltic Revolution, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the Path to Independence, published by the Yale University Press, Chechnya, Tombstone of Russian Power, again published by Yale University Press, the Ukraine and Russia, and then other books. His latest book, Climate Change and the Nation State, published by Oxford University Press, was published in March 2020 and in an updated paperback edition in fall 2021. So with this, I would like to invite Professor Lieven to present his work. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Sorry, I'm only sorry that I can't be with you in person. Yerevan is a city that I'm extremely fond of, ever since I went there for the first time in the autumn of 1990 as a British journalist. And after that, I covered the Southern Caucasus from Moscow, of course, but with frequent visits from 1990 to 1996. So I saw the region and its conflicts in those years. And so I thought that I would, in view of that, in view of my later work in the Middle East and in view of what's now happening in the Middle East, I would look at the similarities and differences between Russian attempts to re-establish hegemony in the Southern Caucasus and American/Israeli attempts to maintain or establish hegemony in the Middle East. Now, by 1994, my Western journalistic colleagues and I, who were working in your region, most of us, I think, had come to the conclusion that what you would see in future was some version of a Pax Russica in the Southern Caucasus, imposed from Moscow, because the post-Soviet conflicts of the region had left two of the states in the region defeated. Armenia, of course, had won, but was in a pretty bad economic situation and also economically very dependent on Russia. Georgia and Azerbaijan had reverted to basically their former communist leaderships. Shevardnadze had been communist first secretary in Georgia. Aliyev, of course, was a general in the KGB and had his deep network in Azerbaijan. And the government in Armenia, though not formally communist, was certainly very friendly to Moscow, if only, of course, because of its deep fears of Turkey. And Russia had, or appeared to have, tremendous soft power as well. The legacy of course, of the Soviet Union and the connections between the elites and Russia, as even despite the economic troubles of Russia at that time, the troubles of the Caucasus were much deeper. And so there was a tremendous labor movement from all the countries, perhaps especially Armenia, to Russia in those years. Why did Russia fail to re-establish a stable hegemony? Well, first of all, and this also relates to American experience in the Middle East, military defeat. The Chechen War of 94 to 96 was, of course, a disaster for Russia. I covered it as a journalist, and at moments I simply couldn't believe what I was seeing in terms of the collapse of the Russian army and Russian military power. And obviously that diminished the fear of Russia in the southern Caucasus. Now this fear was partially re-established by Russian victory in the war of 2008 with Georgia. And certainly in the case of Georgia, it has a very great effect to this day, the memory of how Saakashvili went to war in August 2008 in an effort to recover the lost territories, and was, of course, crushingly defeated. That continues heavily to influence Georgian attitudes. But that Russian success on a small scale was, of course, followed 14 years later by the debacle and quarrel of Ukraine. But Russian influence in the South Caucasus by 2008 had already been heavily qualified by the appearance of elements in the region which elements which, except for a very brief period in 1919, had never been present at all, namely the United States, European Union. And in these states, to a degree, tried to bring peace settlements to the region. That is to say, they didn't in the case of Georgia and its separatist regions. They basically just sided with Georgia. But in the case of Azerbaijan and Armenia, Europe and the US had a strong interest in trying to bring Armenia and Azerbaijan together and to finally resolve the conflict over Artsakh, because, of course, on the one hand, you had the role of the Armenian diaspora in France, especially, and in America. But on the other hand, there was the desire to gain access to the oil and gas of Azerbaijan, and also to establish Azerbaijan as a route from Central Asia to Europe, bypassing Russia and Iran. But despite repeated attempts, the European Union and the US, the Minsk process, failed to bring Armenia and Azerbaijan together. Russia, too, had a very strong interest in bringing about a peace settlement for Artsakh and reconciling Armenia and Azerbaijan, because, on the one hand, Russia, of course, had an old attachment to Armenia. Armenia, except for the separatist regions of Georgia, but was the last place with Russian troops in the southern Caucasus, a Russian base. But on the other hand, Russia was very anxious to maintain good relations with Azerbaijan, to keep it from falling completely into the Western camp, and also because, as with Georgia, of the danger that separatists and Islamist rebels in the northern Caucasus would make their way across Azerbaijan to the northern Caucasus. But Russia also fails. And the lesson of this, I think, is that where the really deep-seated commitments and national interests of countries of a region are concerned, outside influence is in the end going to be highly qualified. There is a limited amount that you can do with hegemony from outside. In the end, if you want to really control the situation and resolve, or at least under Soviet rule, as we saw, freeze, but freeze for 70 years, local conflicts, you have to have troops on the ground. And not just peacekeepers, you have to have basically an army of occupation that will tell people what to do. And Russia, of course, could no longer do that. The US and Europe were not willing to do that. And this, I think, has a considerable parallel now with what we see of US problems in the Middle East. Just an aside, why Russia's apparently enormous soft power so relatively ineffective? This is something which, by the way, also deeply puzzled the Russians in Ukraine. They could never quite understand why, with millions and millions of Ukrainians working in Russia, with enormous amounts of intermarriage, both of Ukrainians in Russia, but also, across Central and Eastern Ukraine. Most people in the cities were actually some mixture of Russians and Ukrainians. They couldn't quite understand why they had failed. And one reason, of course, at the level of the elites, the intelligentsia and the journalists, the people shaping the public discourse, was, of course, the greater soft power of the West. Not actually economically for a long time, but ideologically. Just as in various parts of the world, despite its lack of economic appeal, communism, Soviet communism, had tremendous influence. So obviously, Western democracy after the end of the Cold War really presented itself and was taken by many people, and still is, as simply a civilization. Europe was described as civilization. The former Soviet Union was somehow regarded as anti-civilization or barbarism. So Russia was challenged by new ideological forces, cultural forces from outside. And once again, I mean, but this does also illustrate that soft power is not enough, because, of course, this did not help the US or Europe actually to resolve the conflicts of the region or establish their own hegemony. And you see that as well with the US in the Cold War, and to a degree today. US soft power, of course, was enormous. I mean, it is now, as a result of Trump, as a result of aspects of American economic, cultural, political decay, as a result of the rise of China, it is fading. But outside Europe, it was always qualified, once again, by the primacy of local factors and local vital interests and agendas. Now, soft power does not fail completely. If you look at the present stance of the Georgian government towards Russia, this is very heavily influenced, of course, by economic interest, by the enormous importance of Russia as a market for Georgian goods, something well recognized by much of the ordinary Georgian population, especially in the countryside, where the Russian market for agricultural goods is crucial. But also, if you, especially since the Ukraine war, if you drive up to the Georgian military highway up towards the border, the huge numbers of trucks going into and coming from Russia, so many of them, of course, Turkish trucks, and with barely concealed European Union goods in transit, in some cases relabeled. This has had a great influence on the Georgian government's willingness or desire to get on with Russia, leaving aside personal considerations. And this, in the case of Georgia, has so far cancelled out, well, or has come to cancel out in recent years, or block the passionate desire of much of the Georgian intelligentsia to align with the US and Europe. But this would still not have worked had it not been for the legacy of the war of 2008, Russian victory over Georgia, and of the tremendous Russian suffering, Georgian suffering in the Abkhaz War in 92 to 93, and this very strong and very understandable Georgian desire not to be drawn by the US and Europe into the Ukraine war and a new conflict with Russia. So I'm afraid that in the end, in many of these cases, and that was true in Abkhazia, it was true of South Ossetia, and it was true of Nagorno-Karabakh, that there are cases where in the end, these conflicts are only going to be resolved on the battlefield. And if an outside power is not willing or able to intervene on the battlefield, all its other power will prove very limited, as has proved the case, of course, with Russia and Armenia, where Russia's either inability because of the Ukraine war or unwillingness to intervene on the side of Armenia has, for the moment at least, crippled Russian influence in Armenia and led to, for the moment at least, the ascendancy of the influence of the United States in particular. And we see that with now the TRIPP transit project between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Now, coming to the US in the Middle East, but US soft power there has always been qualified by one enormous factor, which is not present in Eastern Europe or the former Soviet Union. When I came back from Afghanistan in 2002, I was invited to advise a very leading Western philanthropist, promoting civil society and democracy and freedom, free market in Eastern Europe. And he said to me, we have these tremendous opportunities in the Muslim world because there, even compared to the former communist world, we have a clean slate. He said, we have no, there is no civil society, so we can really start building things from the ground up. I looked at him and I said, I think you're forgetting something. He said, what? And I said, well, Islam. Islam has a very extensive, very deeply rooted, of course also deeply divided, but still, role in society, a whole network of institutions, which the United States, for all its power, simply cannot match in the region. The other point, of course, is that in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and this has never been adequately acknowledged by the West, although it's now absolutely clear in the case of Ukraine, the West could rely on anti-colonial feeling, nationalism directed against, in the case of Eastern Europe, the former imperial power, and in the case of Ukraine and the Southern Caucasus, to some extent, the continued imperial power, namely Russia. Well, then I said something that you really shouldn't say to Americans, and I said, who is the imperial power in the Middle East, the hegemon that people are reacting against? That did not go down well, but it is, of course, completely true. In the Middle East, the US and Britain and France before them are caught in a complete and unresolvable bind, which is to say that their social and ideological program for the region rests on the idea of promoting secular national states, like the Shah in Iran. But nationalism in the region, whether secular or Islamist, is of course directed previously against France and Britain, and now against the United States. So rather than, as in Eastern Europe or the former Soviet Union, being able to rely on mass democratic nationalist support, as we have seen again and again, the US in the Middle East is forced back upon reliance on military dictatorships to do the will of the imperial hegemon, and also, of course, to resist Islamism. And the US difficulty in this regard has been made, of course, infinitely worse by the role of Israel, which has sought hegemony, especially recently, simply through outright military domination, power, defeating its enemies and nothing else, but does not have the military power actually to march into Damascus and Cairo. Maybe it could in the case of Damascus, it has in Lebanon, of course. But even if it did, it could not possibly occupy and rule those countries. It simply doesn't have the men. And in any case, there would be colossal guerrilla wars. Now, this, of course, brings us to the experience of the US in Iraq, because the American ability to dominate the region militarily seemed to be absolutely confirmed by victory over Iraq in 1991. And indeed, if the US had been contented with that, I think you would see and had sought a different political role elsewhere, you would see a measure of real US hegemony in the region to this day. And, I mean, it does still exist to an extent, but it's much more limited. But in the 1990s, the US fails to resolve two conflicts. It fails to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because of the implacable opposition in the end of dominant forces in Israel. And of course, something which is, I think, unique, I can't think of a parallel, the role of the Israel lobby inside the United States. You can't see anything like that in the case of Russia or anywhere else, as far as I can remember or think. But that also, of course, the Israel lobby and the role of Israel prevent the US from doing something which at certain moments, particularly after 9/11 and after or in the run-up and immediately after the Iraq war of 2003, much of the Iranian leadership was extremely anxious for a settlement with the US, which the US at that stage could have got on infinitely better terms than it's likely to get today. But that too was blocked by the implacable hostility of Israel and the Israel lobby to Iran. Not only that, but that played a critical part. And so once again, you see how, without actually being able to place troops on the ground and exercise direct imperial control, the ability of an outside hegemon to control things will be limited. And from this point of view, what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11 has been crucial. You would not, I think, see or have seen the degree of resistance and whatever you want to call it, obduracy, if you want, on the part of the Iranian regime towards the US in recent years, had it not been for the fact that since the US quagmire in Iraq and defeat in Afghanistan and the backlash of the US public against wars of occupation, the Iranians can be pretty confident that the US will simply not invade Iran on the ground. They will not do what they did in Iraq, because of course Iraq turned out so badly. Maybe the US, if the war goes on, will occupy some islands in the Persian Gulf, but that's it. So US military failure, like Russian military failure, has greatly qualified the US ability to exert dominance. And then also, as I say, the factor which isn't present with Russia in the Southern Caucasus, the hatred that Israel has created and has continued to create among all the Muslim states of the region. So the US has been more and more reduced, as is Israel, by the way, basically to trying to exert imperial power through bombardment, through long-distance bombardment. This, to some extent, goes back all the way to the British from the years after the First World War, when the British too used air power to coerce recalcitrant tribes in Iraq and rebels in Iraq and in Afghanistan. But that was always a stopgap measure. The British never did manage to conquer or rule or pacify Afghanistan from that point of view. And as we see today, bombardment is never going to be enough. It wasn't enough for the Germans in the Second World War. It wasn't enough for the Allies in the Second World War. It hasn't been enough for the Russians in Ukraine. And I think, although I fear that the Russians will now, since on the ground in eastern Ukraine they are completely bogged down, I fear that they will resort to a much less restrained and limited campaign of bombardment of Ukrainian cities. I'm also extremely confident that this will not work, because it never has worked. You know, if you have a sufficient will on the part of the regime and the population to hold out, then bombarding them will not bring them to surrender. It did in the case of Serbia during the Kosovo War, but that, of course, was limited to driving the Serbs out of Kosovo. And even then, it only worked because Russia actually intervened on the US side to broker a kind of compromise. But even there, as we see, the West and US is still incapable of actually bringing about a resolution to the conflict between Serbia and the Kosovo Albanians. And indeed, there you have to have a NATO military force on the ground, preventing the two sides from going to war again, which if the EU and the US were to withdraw from the region, or the EU were to collapse, I'm absolutely convinced that there would be a new war over Kosovo, which, by the way, the Serbs would win. You see, I think, in this comparison between the Southern Caucasus and the Middle East, some of the similar patterns of imperial control, indirect imperial control. Now, the US is now attempting, in the case of Armenia and Azerbaijan, to resolve a conflict through outside influence without a military presence. And this looks at the moment fairly hopeful, though we still don't know what will be the consequences of the war in Iran. But it must sadly be acknowledged that in practical terms, on the ground, the conflict had already been resolved on the battlefield, as it was in the 1990s by Armenian victory, this time around by Azerbaijani victory, which, as I say, the Russians, being unwilling to intervene with their own troops, were unable to prevent or resolve. Now, the difficulty facing the US, of course, and the US has the money, and it has great influence in both Armenia and Azerbaijan. What are the problems? Well, first of all, once again, in 1994 and after, in the case of Georgia, I was told by senior Georgian officials and Russians that naturally, having been Soviet foreign minister and been Georgian first secretary, Edward Shevardnadze, there was nothing in him that was instinctively opposed in any way to accepting indirect hegemony from Moscow, relying on Moscow for protection and so forth and so on. And I was told that Shevardnadze was more than willing to enter the Eurasian Union, to enter the military pact with Russia, to have Russian bases on Georgian soil. But there was one price. There was one price that he had to demand from Moscow, because that was what Georgian nationalism among his own supporters insisted on, and that was that Russia should return Abkhazia and South Ossetia to Georgia. And Russia would not do that. From their point of view, it was impossible to broker, especially with Abkhazia, a deal that would not leave the Abkhaz completely vulnerable again to total Georgian control. And they preferred in the end to have a military presence in Abkhazia and South Ossetia than a friendship with Georgia that they reckoned, and of course, as it turned out, they were probably almost certainly right, could be overturned by a new Georgian government or by the overthrow of Shevardnadze, which of course is what happened after Saakashvili took power. So they could not, despite basically the offer from Tbilisi, the Russians could not agree to that. Now, in the case of the US today, with the TRIPP, the question, of course, is Armenia naturally very highly desirous of good relations, of close relations, of partnership with the US. But is the price being demanded by Azerbaijan too high? That's the first thing. Is it just going to be too high for any Armenian government to accept? The second thing is that, of course, as with Russia, basically as with every hegemon, attempted hegemon in the region, going back to the Romans and the Sasanians, there are rivals. But in the South Caucasus, you have four great powers. One, the United States from outside, or far away, and the European Union, and three regional powers, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, all with very strong interests in the region, all jostling against each other, but all now in their different ways, including Turkey, which is by now really only a NATO member in name only, all of them highly distrustful of the US And in the case of Iran and Turkey, of course, even more distrustful as a result of the recent actions of the US and Israel. And of course, Israeli actions, and especially Israeli support for the Kurds, is driving Turkey more and more in an anti-Israeli and therefore anti-US direction. And so, once again, the US attempt to exercise influence from outside by purely soft power, because very wisely, Trump has so far excluded any US security presence. Whether that will be true of future US governments, I don't know. And then you have, of course, the what is beginning to look like a de facto US military defeat in Iran, in the sense that, I mean, of course, the US has destroyed the Iranian Navy and Air Force such as it was, but Iran has demonstrated its ability not just to hold out, but to close the Straits of Hormuz and to inflict devastating damage on America's own allies in the region, which in the case of Saudi Arabia and Qatar has led to them thinking very seriously about qualifying their alliance with the United States. The other thing when it comes to the US, compared to its three rivals in the region, is of course distance and time. Azerbaijan benefited enormously, of course, from Israeli help in its war with Armenia over Artsakh. And clearly, Israel had a green light to give this help to the United States. I doubt it would have done so otherwise. On the other hand, of course, Azerbaijan is highly dependent on and linked to Turkey, which they say is becoming more and more anti-Israeli. But in addition, there is, of course, the question of how long the United States will be around in the Caucasus. When I was covering Afghanistan after 9/11, an American journalist asked me in tones of sort of bewilderment, but how long has Iran had this influence in Afghanistan? And clearly from the tone and the context, he was expecting a reply like, since the Iranian Revolution, or since development of Iranian oil. And my reply was, well, not much more than 2,600 years. 2,600 years, of course, is about the time that some or other Iranian state has been a neighbor of Armenia. One does have to ask oneself whether the United States will still be present in the Southern Caucasus 2,600 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. We'll follow our agenda, and now I would like to invite Dr. Ma Bin, who is going to present a paper called The Commitment Practice Dilemma of Central Asia as the Core Area of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Dr. Ma is the Deputy Director and Associate Professor of the Center for SCO Studies, Center for Russia and Central Asian Studies, Institute of International Relations at Fudan University. His research interests include Eurasia, Belt and Road Initiative, IPE, etc. He mainly focuses on infrastructure, connectivity, political risks of FDI, and the SCO in recent years. Among other publications, he has authored 2 books and is working on a new book project about the China-Europe freight train.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here to take part in this very interesting and very important discussion, and to see the beautiful places, and to see the friendly peoples, and
to attending this very insightful discussion. And in the past 2 years, as our chair mentioned, I'm working on the connectivity, especially between China, Central Asia, and Europe, and of course, including the Caucasus regions. And I'm working on the 2 books in these recent years. One is the monograph about the China Railway Express. That is, the other name is China-Europe Freight Train, and mainly focus on the domestic perspectives about why China have this connectivity, why China have this project. Really, according to the discussions, seems like it's part of the Belt and Road Initiative, is part of the international strategy. Of course, it's part of the international cooperation or the Belt and Road Initiative. But if we look back of the process, how this project come true, and we will see the domestic logic is the main logic of this project. Is not cooperate with the other regions. It's motivated by the regions, different regions in China, not by the outsiders. This is the first book. The second one is edited book, is about the corridor politics, and which really close what we discussed in these 2 days. A lot of topic have been mentioned, and I think is very insightful for my work. And on the first part, I want to maybe some comments about the last session. The first is some data complementary for Harak's presentation, and about the corridor, especially for the middle corridors. Until now, the 80% of the China and Europe connectivity or China-Europe train is between China and Central Asia, between China and Russia. Only 20% is between China and Europe. So when we look at those volumes, how many containers, how many trains, so it's not a very big part between China and Europe. So even the total volume seems like very big. And this is the first one. The second one is among those containers between China and Europe, only 20 to 30% is through middle corridors since 2022 and 2025. And this is the left, mainly through the north route. That means Russia part, Russia railway. And the other data is about how we say a lot of containers. But if we have the values, about the maximum is 6% of the total China-Europe trade, and the minimum is about 4%. That means between 4 to 6% of China and Europe trade about the whole volume. And this one is, I think, is also related with Mr. Gushinov's point about the Malacca dilemma for China. So when we look at the China-Europe freight train, no matter is we can put all the corridors together. It is not. I think it's very important for China and Europe to have a new alternative for the trade, for the logistics, but it's not enough to replace or figure out the Malacca dilemma for China. And I think this is the second point. And the third one, I think, is about the geopolitics or the grid game and the corridors. Usually, when we talk about the grid games, the geopolitics, geopolitical factor usually will divide the region. Well, it's not a very positive factor for the connectivity, because it's very hard to say China will support a project like help U.S. to maybe help U.S. to transport the critical minerals to cut off the dependence on China. I think this is this is conflict, and for middle corridors, China, Russia, US, European Union, also India, and many other countries have signed the agreements and MOUs to cooperation on the corridors constructions. It seems like suddenly every great powers became interested in these corridors. And so even India and Europe, they have the AMIC. They signed the agreement to build the AMIC, but in past at least 3 years, seem like very little progress. And you also mentioned, Professor also mentioned the Middle East's role in the corridors, and corridor is not a very important alternative for Middle East, but for Middle East, India, and Europe. Seems like the similar situation. And this is the third one. I think for not only for Armenia, for Caucasus, it also for Central Asia. The most important thing is how to find a way to overcome the obstacles posed by the geopolitical factors to the corridor construction. It's not seem like there's the returning of the grid game or the geopolitical competition is rising in this region. The corridors will be much more easier to constructing, to cooperate. I think this is different with what we think about the geopolitical factors. And the fourth one is the role of the regions. For the role of the regions, we can use Central Asia and also Caucasus as an example. For China and Europe, first train, Central Asia is a terminal and is also a transit harbor. So for the terminal and transit harbor, it's the different logic to cooperate between China and this Central Asia and the Caucasus. And I think we talking about the corridor construction, we should put this into our consideration. And the other is the inside of the region, like 5 Central Asia countries, like Armenia and Azerbaijan, their connectivity, and then became part of the transit region and all the terminal region. I think this part is also very important. And the other one is about the potential ability. For the middle corridor, I think I give some data about the middle corridor's ability according to the China-Europe free trade. We're talking about we are talking about the potential ability, not the policy reality. There's a lot of obstacles from the geopolitical competition, from a lot of dimensions to maybe can influence the construction of the corridor. I think we should do this, and I think it's partly agreement in the 2 days discussion. And the topic I discussed, the commitment practice paradox about the SCO, I think they are similar, because when we talk about the SCO, seems like especially for some medias, for some reports, seems like the SCO will be very stronger, like anti-West, or seems like support China and Russia to have a geopolitical competition with the West, with many other great powers. But when we look at the SCO's function, seems like besides the security dimension and the political dimension, of course, for some others, it seems like not so important for China, for Russia, and even for Central Asia and many other member states. It's not so important. That's why I have this topic about the commitment and the practice paradox, and several paths. And it's a paper I just complete, and so that's why we have the conceptual framework, and the last I also put some policy analysis. And the first one is the framework about the core area of the international organizations, because since 2021, SCO begins to state that Central Asia is the core area of this organization. Seems like, because when we talk about the international organizations, so the core area, there must be maybe very geographical meaning, core and periphery. So when we call the Central Asia is the core of the organization, I have two dimensions. The first is geography, and the second is functional, and the other is the self-endowed and other-endowed. Well, for the Central Asia as the core area or the core region of the SCO, I use this framework to make the analysis. And of course, then on the framework, on the theoretical part, I have a lot of discussions about this framework. In today's discussion, I will not discuss them more. And for the first is the significance of core area in the SCO is strategic importance. So for the core area in the SCO is great, help the organization to better achieve its goals of promoting regional security, economy, and cultural exchanges. I only discussed the security, economy, and culture exchanges, because when we talk about the cooperation among SCO, we said there are three pillars. The three pillars, first is security, then is the economy, then is the culture exchange, or the people-to-people exchange bonds. And that's why we discussed these three parts. The second one is the functional influence, and maybe is what kind of function the region can play in the three parts. And the second part is analyze the Central Asia's function in this one. For geographical center, maybe is the geographical center of the SCO, and it is also the connectivity harbor. Maybe for the connectivity harbor is also a function part. It's not only the geographical part. And the other dimension is the securitical and also the economic hub, but it also related with the connectivity. For the securitical, it's mainly about the non-traditional security. But to me, honestly, for the SCO, when we talk about the SCO members' understanding about the security, the regime security or the regional stability is one of the priorities. It's not only about the non-traditional securities and border securities, it's also about the regime security for SCO member states. Even China, we focus on this, we put this as one of the priorities for the SCO's function, or what we can get from the SCO's operation. And the third part is about the paradox dilemma of Central Asia's role. For the security field, we mentioned that they like the traditional security, the border region, and maybe the neighboring countries' stability of their military relations. I think in the early stages of the SCO, it is very important or very useful for all the member states, especially between China and Central Asian countries. They signed the agreement about their cooperation or their trust and their even their military existence in the border regions, and keep the regional borders stability. And it's very important for China and Central Asian countries, especially for China in the 1990s, when the China northwest part of China faced a lot of challenges. And for the non-traditional securities, we know that the anti-terrorist operations, and in SCO, we call it the three evils, terrorism, separatism, and radicalism. And for the other, maybe in nowadays, there are some discussion about the new global issues, like the environmental issues, like the cybersecurity, but at the beginning it's about the traditional security and the anti-terrorist agendas. That's the most important one. But nowadays, since the SCO was established in 2001 and especially after 2004, when we look at the military exercises, Central Asia is not if we put the 5 Central Asia together, maybe it's kind of even compared to the military exercises happened. Russia, China also hold these military exercises. But for the non-traditional security, we know that the SCO had the regional agency of the anti-terrorist in Central Asia, and in last year's summit, SCO also found the new four centers. The 4 centers is not, of course, it have a function for the study and research, but more importantly, is about the coordinating center among the member states to deal with the security issues for the economic and trade field, and even in this part, I listed several tables like trade for all the Central Asian countries. As percentage, its trade with China is only about with China, with Russia, with Central Asia, is only from 0.3 to 6% of 8 of them. So that means Central Asia is not the main partner of the main economic entities of the SCO. And for the FDI, the percentage usually less than 1%. So I think that's the reality of, and maybe can give us evidence to make the judgment that Central Asia is not the SCO's maybe core area for investment. And for the culture and the humanistic field, like the culture exchange, I use the case in the education. For China, 8 year China, before the pandemic, 8 year China have 600 and 660,000 students studying abroad, and very few go to Central Asia, mainly to the US, mainly to the Europe, to Japan, to South Korea, to Singapore, Hong Kong, but very few to Central Asia. And that means, but vice versa, Central Asia maybe is still not the main countries the abroad the foreign students came from. For Russia, for China, for India, none of them the main foreign students from Central Asia. So that's why we said on the third pillar, Central Asia still not the core area. But as we said, since 2021, the SCO on the organization level, official level, every year they had this statement. They emphasized and they announced Central Asia as the core area of the SCO. We put this as like a commitment of the organization to Central Asia. And the last part, I think, is the reality of maybe the failure to fulfill the commitment to Central Asia. And this part, the next two parts is some policy analysis according to this situation. And the first is the global and regional, I think, is changes or challenges. The first is the topic we discussed in the past 2 days, the returning of the grid game. And I think this will cause the pressure or challenges for ICO to deal with the returning grid game. And the other one is the security challenges. For the security challenges, I think it's also related with the corridor constructions. And there's a lot of discussion about the advantages of the corridor or advantages of the, especially for China and the railway cooperation with Europe. Seems like this railway connectivity and construction will be much more safer than the sea transportation. But I think it's out of our ordinary knowledge, because for the railway transportation, only a big rock can stop the train. So I think it's much more fragile than the sea transportation. And so this is the security challenges. And the other is economic connectivity. The first is infrastructure projects. For the infrastructure projects, and yes, it's the corridors. And we also mentioned in last session about the China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan railway, and also a question about what kind of role it can play. You asked from Harek about what kind of role. I think it's part of the short corridor and also part of the middle corridor. But because it will not change the basic situation of the short corridors, because through Kazakhstan, all of those logistics can be operated through Kazakhstan, and then to Uzbekistan, then to Iran or Afghanistan or to Turkey. And this new CKU railway is not changed a lot. As I said, it's not changed the basic situation of the short corridor, but it's very important for the three countries. I think that is, we can call it the inside the region connectivity, not among the regions or trans the regions connectivity. And the other is the policy coordination. And for the, we also mentioned that in the former discussions about the coordination among the different countries among China, Central Asia, and also Europe countries, and related with the economic sanctions. Actually, among those China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Poland, and Germany, these 6 countries, they signed agreement about this international logistics. And this agreement, I think they can keep this logistics out, keep this out of the economic sanctions. Even there's a lot of criticized, or there's a lot of statements by the European parliaments, but it's not very. I think it's not a very real pressure for these operations, and the biggest pressure is from the customers in Europe, and they cancel the contract, or they refuse to use this logistics service because they think this will be supported Russia. This will help Russia to get some resources to help the war, and they do this from their own path. It's not from the economic sanctions, but at the early years, especially in 2022, for Chinese part, a lot of Chinese companies who operate in the logistics, they are worried about this, and they had done a lot of work, and that's why since 2022, there's a lot of Chinese companies and also platform companies operating the logistics. They began to invest the resources into the middle corridors and the short corridors. And actually, since then, in 2023, and China have a very big project. I think it's the research project about the the China and Europe corridors, or the China-Europe great corridors, and they include of the political part, the economic part, engineer part, and a different part from different perspectives to study the China and Europe corridors, and we call it the Great Corridors. And we have done this project for 3 years. I think maybe it's a kind of help us to understand this corridors or this policy coordination. And the last part is the paths. I just only use some cases. We mentioned that the water resource management, in between China and Central Asia, and also inside Central Asia, this is a very important issue for the ICO. And I think maybe for the big projects, they don't have this ability, but for those small projects, this can be a way to figure out the commitment and fulfill paradox. And there is public health, and since last year and this year, ICO had signed some hospitals in Shanghai, in Beijing, and they signed the agreements with the Central Asia hospitals and the medical schools. But they had the co-laboratory and some research centers, and maybe I think for this experience is building a paradigm to have those cooperation on the very specific fields, not so grand fields. And the last part is the challenges, the internal challenges, maybe such as the weak internal cohesion. And I think we also discussed this and questioned this. Does this, like South Caucasus and Central Asia, it is a region or not? I think maybe we can. The other question is not is a region or not. The question is it is an integrated region or not. So the external challenges, I think, what I just mentioned, that the geopolitical factors, the returning of the Great Game, I don't think it will have a lot of positive influence on this corridors or the corporations in this region. And the last base conclusion, and examines the double dilemmas faced by the Central Asia as the core area of the ICO, and it finds that the core area function of the Central Asian member states faces the commitment and practice dilemma or paradox in security, economic, and cultural fields. And the future outlook, I think, is maybe is the depth integration and contribute to the construction of the more equal and cooperative and inclusive regional coordination. I think maybe from the maybe the small fields and small project, that will be a good way to learn the experience and build the paradigm. And that's all my sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to invite our next speaker, Professor Meher Sahakyan, to present his work, Superpowers in the South Caucasus and Central Asia, American and Chinese Geostrategies. Dr. Sahakyan is a visiting lecturer at the ISIS Catholic University of Vendée in France and Rennes University in China. He is the founding director of the China-Eurasia Council for Political and Strategic Research in Armenia and the founding editor of the Routledge Research in Eurasian Geopolitics books series. He edited and co-edited several books and authored many articles, some of which published in Chinese Political Science Review, Asian Affairs, etc. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your introduction. Today I will speak about the American and Chinese geostrategies in South Caucasus and Central Asia. I started this research at the School of Advanced International Studies during my Fulbright visiting scholarship, and of course I took interviews from most of the ambassadors who worked in Central Asia and in South Caucasian states for triangulation with the documents and also academic literature. And of course, the collapse of the Soviet Union returned great power competition to South Caucasus and Central Asia, where Russia was not alone, but of course it was playing the main role, as Russia thinks, and still it thinks that these two regions are a sphere of its influence. But there are some changes, there are some historical changes in Russian influence. Of course, we discussed it already. It is the first Ukrainian issue, as Russia is very concentrated in Russo-Ukrainian war and in its indirect war with the NATO in Ukraine. So for this reason, it has limited capabilities to concentrate on South Caucasus and Central Asia. The second issue is Nagorno-Karabakh. Nagorno-Karabakh, of course, Russia lost a lot because of the Nagorno-Karabakh. Now you will never find any Azerbaijani scholar, official, or someone who will say that, you know, we have Nagorno-Karabakh. We occupied Nagorno-Karabakh because of Russia. They are very thankful to Turkey, and of course, in Armenia also it is making some kind of problems. And of course, energy supply chains diversification is also being changed in these two regions. As you know, historically, Russia was deciding where to send their oil and gas from South Caucasus or Central Asia, but now there are also pipelines which are going from Azerbaijan, from Turkey to Europe. And of course, some pipelines from Central Asia, of course, are going to China. So there's a diversification, and this kind of change in Russia's influence in these regions are also bringing some kind of influence and opportunities to our powers. Of course, I will not speak about all powers. Turkey, Iran, India also are getting some kind of opportunities, but I will focus on two superpowers, the United States and China. One is our, when I am saying Eurasia, I mean continent, or as you wish, supercontinent. And I think that if we have this continent, there cannot be now Eurasia in Eurasia. And the other one is, of course, non-Eurasian Washington. And the research question is, why and how does Washington frame and implement its geostrategy in South Caucasus and Central Asia, and so what? So what? I can mention, and I am sure, and I want to argue that these two regions are not top priority for the US, the United States. It is, I am saying, because, and taking as a fact so many interviews with ambassadors who worked in South Caucasus, Central Asia. So these regions are not top priority for the United States, but they are important enough that the United States engaged with these regions and used selective capabilities for its influence and for at least maintaining balance of power. Of course, considering also China's, Russia's, and Iran's role in these two regions. Of course, now we can see that the United States actually continues its long-term geostrategy, which was about, and which is about to send energy resources from Central Asia and South Caucasus towards Europe, and of course to take under control transportation infrastructure, which it's trying to do for TRIPP and other moments, and of course it is trying to keep USD influence in these regions, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the regional states were using USD for their international trade and of course for the regional trade, but there are now also some kind of competitors like Chinese yuan. Now these states are using yuan also for their trade with China, and of course ruble is also standing much more important because of their trade with Russia. They need to use ruble. Also here is coming rupee and others. And of course here the United States, among with this regional energy resources and transportation infrastructure, which is the part of its geostrategy, it is also using strategic partnerships with regional states. As we can see, it has signed comprehensive strategic partnership with Armenia, enhanced strategic partnership with Kazakhstan, enhanced strategic partnership with Uzbekistan, and also strategic partnership with Azerbaijan. And of course, it tried to play a decisive role in relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And of course, it is also some kind of challenge for Russia, which was till 2021, 22, and it was trying to play a major role. So, and this was happened, joint declaration signed by President Donald Trump, President Ilham Aliyev, and Pashinyan before Trump's meeting with Putin in Alaska, you remember it, and it was like something, the message that, look, I am also playing in this territory, it is no more your sphere of influence. So it is also some kind of the part of its geostrategy. In Central Asia, it has also C5+1 format. Of course, there are so many C5+ formats in Central Asia that it is hard to understand which is working, which is not. But of course, it is also very important because in this format, the US is engaging with the states without any other great major or middle powers. So, and let's go and discuss the geostrategy of. I also want to mention that I said that the United States is using its long-term geostrategy because of this oil and gas export, organizing oil and gas export towards Europe, also trying to control transportation route, USD and others, but there is also some kind of updates. We remember that for a long time, promotion of democracy was playing a major role in the United States geopolitics. In South Caucasus, of course, it was not so successful in Central Asia because Central Asian states explained to the US that if you want to play in this territory, you need to be very careful with this democracy promotion. But however, we have also Kyrgyzstan a moment when they were having some kind of success. However, now this is no more working. Forget about promotion of democracy. Trump is no more interested in this. And this is going out from the United States geostrategy. So Trump is businessman. He and his team is interested in minerals, oil, gas, and other things which they can buy or sell. So democracy is out from the game. But there is new kind of update in this geostrategy. They are bringing here high technologies. And you can see that NVIDIA is playing very active role in Armenia, in Azerbaijan, also in Kazakhstan. And if you see what was happening during the last C5+1, every country was speaking about high technologies and something which they signed with United States. So with this, it is also the United States also bringing new update to its geostrategy and trying also to compete with China, which is also going forward with its digital Silk Road. We will speak about it a little bit later. And let's also try to understand why and how does Beijing frame and implement its geostrategy in these regions. As I have mentioned, Central Asia and South Caucasus not top priority for the United States. Sorry to Armenian friends who are very sad for it, but it is true. So these regions are not top priority. But for China, these regions are top priority because they are neighboring regions to China, and of course China has its several tools to implement this geostrategy. And the first one which I want to mention, we are speaking about corridors. There are so many names about these corridors, but for these regions, China has, we know all that China has its Belt and Road Initiative. This is huge geostrategy project, if you want, initiative for which China is advancing towards West, and it is trying to, it is already projecting economies from East Asia until East Europe. And this kind of geoeconomic influence, it is also bringing geopolitical influence. And this has its Belt and Road Initiative, has its mainland direction, which is called Silk Road Economic Belt. And this Silk Road Economic Belt also has 6 corridors. I will not go one by one, but I will tell you about the one which is going from China's and our regions. It is called another corridor, China, Central Asia, Western Asia Economic Corridor. As you see, it has 2 main directions. One is going from China after to Kazakhstan, and also it is from Caspian Sea. It is going to Baku port, and after from Baku to Tbilisi cars, it is going towards Europe. It is all working. It is not something must be done, will be done. It is working, and trucks, cargos are going, railway and trains are going here and there. There is also another direction which is going from also from Central Asia, and you know that in Turkmenistan there are 2 lines to Iran, 2 railways towards Iran, and from these railways it is also going to Bandar Abbas and our ports, Iranian, or to the Western Asian states. So this is standing very important now. Why? Because you know, because of this Russo-Ukrainian war, or if you want, indirect war between NATO and Russia, both sides are using soft balancing. I mean sanctions, economic sanctions. Europe is putting economic sanctions on Russia. Russia is answering, and because of this, the other Chinese corridor, which is called New Eurasian Land Bridge, which was going for Trans-Siberian Railway, the quantity is dropping down. The quantity is dropping down, and this is for this. This road is standing much more important as it is as an alternative. Europe needs to trade with China. China needs to trade with Europe, and of course Central Asian states need, West Asia needs to trade. We can see that now this is also having problem because of the second link which was going from Iran. It is having problem because now as you know, because of this war in Iran, Persian Gulf's Iranian ports are not workable for now. It is the part of geostrategy of China, of course, for these railways. It is connecting economically these regions with China, and you know, nowadays geoeconomic connection is also bringing geopolitical influence, and China is also using the other limited hard balancing. I mean strategic partnerships with two region states. We can see here China-Armenia strategic partnership, China-Kazakhstan permanent comprehensive strategic partnership. There are also very interesting names, as for instance, an all-weather comprehensive strategic partnership for new era. You can see, I will not read everything. You can find with which it has what, but it is interesting with every state in this 8 countries, it has these strategic partnerships. And we can compare it with the US, just this. So as we see here, China is much more proactive, working proactive. It is also another some kind of fact that these regions are top priority for China compared with the United States, which is not top priority. China is also has institutional moment in its geostrategy, and it is all, of course, my good colleague Mabin already introduced Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Shanghai Cooperation Organization is very important for Central Asian states, for China, for Russia. Of course, China and Russia, as Mabin mentioned, the main engines, but of course, it is no more only about China and Russia. As you know, India, Pakistan, and our powers also, Iran, for instance, are also there. Of course, the Central Asia still is core, but as we see, China's influence is also rising, and it is integrating our regions from Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. And of course, from our regions, Armenia and Azerbaijan are also dialogue partners. So we are also, and Armenia already asked to stand also observer. So, and even member of the, we are still waiting, Mabin, do something. And of course, another pillar of the China in this region is yuan. As I have mentioned, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, the ruble's role declined in these two regions. But now, because of its Belt and Road Initiative, China is also offering loans in yuan. It is offering trade with yuan, and yuan's role is standing much more important. It is still not equal to USD, but it is standing much more important, and time is working for China. Why? Because of the weaponization of USD. As you know, US is using its currency for some kind of sanctions, for different things, and for this reason, regional states and even extra-regional states, sometimes they prefer to use this kind of currencies as yuan and ours. So, what else? Let's speak also about Russia's role. Of course, if we are speaking about Central Asia and South Caucasus, Russia is here. And of course, it will be here. So, regional states need to work with this country. And in these regions, actually, China and Russia are partners. They choose cooperation over competition. It is also for deterring the United States and our powers which are trying to be in this region, but it is also about business, it is about economics, and of course here is also the conjunction of the Eurasian Economic Union and Belt and Road Initiative plays very important role. As two parts, they have their own economic leverages, tools, but they didn't compete with each other. But they try to find ways to work with each other and complement with each other, which is also very important. We already mentioned about their cooperation also in Shanghai Cooperation. So let's also evaluate how do regional states respond to these geostrategies. Actually, they are very interested to have China and the United States in these two regions because this is providing them an opportunity to implement soft and hard balancing and also developing their infrastructures. Because you know now is the United States is interested in minerals, critical minerals. It is going to invest. China is there with its investments, and it is also competition. Russia is trying to do more, invest more, but it still keep its place. So this kind of many players in these regions are providing an opportunity to these states to implement balancing. But yes, I remember that some of the speakers mentioned about something like standing important or bringing more attention. But I think that this must be used by regional states, I can say from Armenia's name, very carefully. These states need to treat very carefully because when you are starting very important, it is not always good for this kind of moment where we have the return of the great game and geopolitical harsh competition between these powers. Because you can just stand next battlefield as it is Ukraine. So these states need to treat carefully and do not choose side. Do not choose side. Because if they try to choose side, it will be the end of their sovereignty, it will be the end of their economic development. They need to treat carefully, they need to work with each other, they need to keep calm behavior, and they need to also think about China's example when it was new developing states. I know that you still say that China is developing, but it is not, it is developed state. So, and of course, they need to take this example. When China was new developing state, it was 17th, 18th, it was treating very carefully. It was saying that, look, we need to develop our countries, we need to develop our capabilities and go forward very carefully and wait our time. So these states in these two regions also need to treat very carefully. They do not need to choose side, and they need to go forward very slowly and carefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Professor Aijaz Ahmedwani. Please. Dr. Wani is a fellow in the Strategic Studies program at ORF, based in Mumbai. He tracks China's relation with Central Asia, Pakistan, and the Uyghur Muslim minorities in China's Xinjiang province. In addition, Dr. Wani tracks India-Central Asia relations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and connectivity projects in the region, including Chabahar, the International North-South Transit Corridor, and the Middle Corridor. He has an abiding interest in Kashmir affairs and is well-versed in the region's security dynamics, including terrorism and radicalization. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Maybe people may be exhausted, professors may be exhausted from last 2 days. I will not take much more time, but I have divided my presentation into 2 parts, or rather I would say 4 parts. How we as Indian scholars see this return of great game in Eurasia. And second, how India tries to be a part of this great game. Third, how India initiated certain connectivity projects that has become more reliable, even though today they are nowhere, but maybe today or tomorrow there will be peace between Iran and USA, and there will be some sort of treaty, and we will get the same priorities by USA, which we get till October 2025. How I see this new return of great game, I see it through the prism of cooperative hegemony. That was started by Russia and China after 1991. Russia became the defense guarantor of this region, and China, especially in Central Asia, became the investment bank to harness the resources of Central Asia. After 2020, maybe I will say US and European Union also became a cooperative hegemon because of their strategic needs, that is energy, hydrocarbons and rare earth. We see more and more European Union leaders coming to Central Asia, signing bilateral and multilateral agreements, signing global gateway in last 2 years, and they have promised to invest 10 billion euros, and then last year more 10 billion in the infrastructure of the Middle Corridor. Similarly, during Biden administration, Biden endorsed Middle Corridor, and now Trump also, and not only endorsed Middle Corridor, but also started, when in August the peace agreement was signed between Armenia and Azerbaijan in Washington, he started TRIPP corridor. That is actually to enhance Middle Corridor because of strategic reasons. There are certain players like Turkey and Iran, they are using religion and culture to be the part of this new great game or return of new great game. Now comes India. India looks to this region, to the principle of constructivism, constructive approach, and that constructivism and constructive approach is based on the historical legacy and historical connections which India and Eurasian geographical unit have via Silk Route from ancient times. For example, if we gave them Buddhism, this region gave us Islam, Sufist Islam. Second thing, whatever the Indian initiatives in Greater Eurasia, whether Central Asia or South Caucasus are, they are based on reliability without ignoring, without having some sort of hegemonic approach in Eurasia. Yeah. So, I will start from this. The Russia-Ukraine war and unrest in the Red Sea from the Israel-Gaza conflict which started in 2023 have disrupted the trade routes, causing significant energy and food shortages, particularly for emerging economies like India. Additionally, in 2021, when the Evergreen, a container ship, blocked Suez Canal for 6 days, that costed total trade loss of $54 billion. These delays not only increased the prices of crude oil, gas amid fears that the blockade may continue for weeks. The attacks on shipping containers in the Bab al-Mandab Strait and Red Sea, a crucial global trade route, have significantly disrupted international supply chains. Now, the blockade of Strait of Hormuz has increased the woes of growing economies like India. These crises have made it urgent for India to respond, especially considering its ambitious economic growth targets. India aims to become a $10 trillion economy by 2030 and 15 trillion economy by 2034, driven by its increased FDIs and surge in manufacturing activities. The escalating geopolitical tensions among major players and new geoeconomic and geostrategic challenges further underlined the need for India to establish resilient, reliable, and diversified supply chains and sustainable transport connections. Coming to Eurasia, India has a special relationship based on long history, culture, and commercial relations with Central Asia, facilitated by geographical proximity and Silk Route. However, India-Central Asia relations and India-South Caucasus relations stagnated in 20th century due to Anglo-Russian rivalry in the Great Game and consequent emergence of nation-states with different ideologies. The Great Game, which started in 1830, was intense rivalry between British and Russia empires, which we know. After the breakup of Soviet Union and the formation of independent republics in South Caucasus and Central Asia, India redesigned its ties with the region. New Delhi policy was based on constructivism and launched in 2012 the first policy that is India Connect Central Asia policy as means to reconnect with Central Asia as well as Eurasia, however, India's strategic and economic, even cultural interests remained severely curtailed. As such, aim was stonewalled by Pakistan's lack of willingness to allow passage through its territory. India started new connectivity projects like Chabahar Port and Inastek. Chabahar Port is strategically positioned in an open sea beyond the Strait of Hormuz, one of these three choke points in the Indian Ocean. This location ensures it remains unaffected by any Gulf or Middle East conflict, even though it has been impacted in this war. Additionally, the distance from Chabahar Port to Mundra or Kalinga Port in the Gulf of Caspian, Gujarat is merely 550 nautical miles. A container ship can cover this distance in 2 days or less, thus providing convenient and close proximity option for travel between Chabahar Port and the ports of west coast of India. It was in 2016 Prime Minister Modi visited Iran and officially signed an agreement to develop 2 terminals of Chabahar Port, with New Delhi investing around 500 million in the first phase of Chabahar that was inaugurated in 2017, and officials from 17 countries were present. Then in 2018, what happened when USA went back from the Jacoba? India got a special waiver from USA to invest in Chabahar Port and its projects in Iran, especially connectivity projects with Afghanistan, Central Asia, and to South Caucasus. It was given a special waiver till 2024. And this, in 2024 May, India also signed a long-term contract that was contract for 10 years with Iranian Port Authority on Chabahar to make more investments, to get the confidence of investors from India as well as from other countries in Chabahar, that this is a long-term contract, not an annual affair now, you can invest. But somehow in last year in October, Trump administration took back the waiver and it was sanctioned. I can use this. If we see the traffic along the Chabahar port, that much has increased. And in financial year of 2023-24, it handled around 25788 TEUs and bulk handling crossed the 1.5 million metric tons mark. Now, India was in talks with partners of Central Asia as well as Eurasia to develop Chabahar and used multilateral and bilateral diplomacy with Central Asian partners on Chabahar to make it a part of SCO or INSTAC, like Turkoman Port, Turkoman Bashi and Chabahar Port. Most of the Central Asian countries as well as India insisted that these ports should be part of INSTAC. Now, this was all about these roads. Now, there is a special relation between Iran, India and Armenia. This is driven by strategic, geopolitical and geostrategic interests. A historically rooted partnership between India and Armenia has evolved into a frontline strategic partnership. The strategic realignment goes beyond a diplomatic gesture. It reflects shared aspiration for multipolar order amid perceived threats from neighboring states. Evolving regional and geopolitical tensions have contributed to India's growing ties with Armenia. During 44 there is conflict in 2020. Turkey provided active support to Azerbaijan in its conflict with Armenia. Pakistan also supported Baku, driven by a close strategic partnership and shared perspective on issues such as Kashmir and Nagorno-Karabakh. According to Armenian sources, the Pakistani military, including special units, participated in combat operations alongside Azerbaijani forces during the conflict, contributing to Baku's victory. And to take forward these strategic relationship, Yerevan appointed a defense attaché to its embassy in New Delhi in 2023 to strengthen military coordination. Armenia also finalized many agreements to acquire defense equipment, and deliveries started in July 2023, and additional consignment is dispatched from India in January 2026. So this is India supplied arms to Armenia. But what was the strategic calculus behind India-Armenia cooperation? Defense cooperation, especially, I will say. Due to Russia's ongoing involvement in Ukraine, Armenia is pursuing joint production and development of high-tech arms with India to reduce reliance on single foreign supplier. New Delhi also supported Yerevan in rebuilding its security architecture and supplied advanced military hardware. During his recent visit, the Chief of Defense Staff underscores the importance of joint exercises and training. This approach ensures that Armenian personnel are trained in India's modern mountain warfare doctrines, replacing outdated practices and further strengthening the bilateral defense partnership. The India-Armenia bilateral relationship has acquired significant strategic weight amid the evolving geopolitical landscape of Eurasia. The trajectory reflects a calibrated response to shifting power dynamics beyond India's immediate neighborhood, particularly as Pakistan, Turkey, Azerbaijan axis expands its influence across Caucasus, South Asia, and Central Asia. New Delhi recognized that closer ties with Yerevan would secure its strategic foothold in South Caucasus, help offset this alignment, and underscores the region's challenging geopolitical context. Indian defense exports to Armenia were intended to preserve the regional balance. That is what I am stressing, of power rather than escalate tensions. In this sense, they also contributed to creating conditions conducive to a subsequent peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It was not to provide defense equipment to Armenia to have war with Azerbaijan. It was actually to balance the power in the region, because Azerbaijan was actively getting defense equipment from Turkey, from Pakistan and Israel at times. So it was to balance the power in the region. That is why India-Armenia relationship became special. And for India, there was a reason. Because both Turkey and Azerbaijan has always tried to infringe in our sovereignty. They have highlighted Kashmir issue, which is integral part of our territory. And even I will tell you one thing, some of the scholars here showed the map, which pinched me a lot. Because they show some of the territory of Pak-occupied Kashmir as the part of Pakistan, not the part of India. So this is all about India-Armenia relationship. New Delhi thought it carefully coordinated efforts not only maintains regional peace and balance of power, but also demonstrates its emergence as a dependent defense exporter and a staunch supporter of multipolar world, founded on principles of equality rather than hegemony and coercion. Now, way forward. how India looks at middle corridor, or maybe now TRIPP corridor. If I go back, it is not. What is happening? Can you help me? Yeah. This one. In INSTEC, there are 3 routes. One is eastern route that connects via Iran directly to Central Asia. The middle route that connects India through Caspian Sea to Russia, and the western route that connects India to Russia via Baku. We as scholars discuss there that if TRIPP corridor will mature, we will connect western route of INSTEC directly to TRIPP corridor to have direct relations, direct trade relations, direct connectivity with not only with Armenia but also with Europe. But there is a problem with TRIPP corridor. There are certain sovereignty issues and what Armenia will get if TRIPP corridor will happen. Armenia should think of larger economic interdependence, not only of South Caucasus, but Central Asia, Europe and Turkey. They should ask for their own rights, and it should be, if not under the security of NATO or someone else, it should be, TRIPP corridor should be under the security of Armenia. Armenia should have its own security architecture. If people will call it Zongor corridor or TRIPP corridor, they should have its own security architecture. Because with corridors, there comes the challenge of terrorism and narco-terrorism. The Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle. Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran, the Golden Crescent. Because nowadays terrorists use more and more narcotics to finance their activities. Another thing, Armenia should not only think of larger economic interdependence, they should also think of what way they will get of this TRIPP corridor. This is the question for Armenian policymakers, Armenian government. Because according to World Bank report, the cargo around middle corridor will triple by 2030. But there are logistical bottlenecks, infrastructure bottlenecks along the existing middle corridor. So, TRIPP corridor may help to become a new artillery for middle corridor. But Armenia should rethink its policy, how to extract revenues out of it. And who will be responsible for the security of this TRIPP corridor. And after that, India, if it matures, India will surely connect with TRIPP corridor via Iran and try to give Armenia to access the Indian Ocean via Chabhar port. Thank you.
We have enough time for the Q&A because I'm not an expert of this geoeconomic and geopolitical questions. I'm not going to ask I will skip mine and will give the chance to our audience to ask better questions than mine could be. Yes.
I am returning to Armenia. One of the characteristics when one thinks of Armenia is the disconnect between the hard data and certain policy orientations. The trade is mostly with Russia, China, UAE for various reasons. There were transfer of gold and so on from Russia, Iran, and so on. Yet there is talk of some kind of aspiration one day to go toward Europe. There has been talk of massive American investments in Armenia. Over the past 3-4 years, American financial help of various kinds to Armenia went from about $45 million to 90. You can count on an average of about 60 million, you know, from 2021, 22 to 25. So almost nothing, very little. There was talk that $500 million would be invested with Firebird. Then it turned out that it's Armenian banks that are paying for Firebird. So there is a kind of alternate reality, apparently. And I wanted to ask your opinion, including Professor Fon's opinion. You know that as Ronald Reagan, I think it was, I was new in the US in a presidential debate, if I am not wrong, with it was with Mondale or something. You know, asked the question, where is the beef? He said, where is the meat? So, where is the substantial help to Armenia? I know that it's not exactly anyone's focus in this conference.
I think after Russia-Ukraine war, when it comes to defense procurements, Armenia has started many bilateral agreements to get defense equipments, and in defense India is playing good role, and even trade between India and Armenia is increasing. Yeah, I don't know the exact data, but I have the data somewhere. And Indian IT sector, there are talks that Indian IT sector may come and invest in Armenia for creating employment opportunities, and because Indian IT sector is known around the world, IT professional. Most of the Silicon Valley engineers, if you see, are from India. Most of the managers of Google and Apple and engineers are from India. And they are thinking of diversifying now their human resources, given the special relationship with Armenia. They are thinking about in those terms. And even some of the, I don't know exactly, some of the firms are currently in Armenia assessing the market potential and what are the laws, Armenian laws and other things. In future they may invest in IT sector, and there may be some R&D, because Armenia is stressing on indigenizing the Indian defense equipment is to have indigenous supply, and they are trying to have some sort of MOUs with India, and their investment may come, but I don't know how much, when and where. But 2 days back when I was in that street, there was a group of people, engineers. They were from one of the bigger firms in Bangalore, and they were having dinner in that Indian restaurant near that Armenian street, and they were talking, and I talked to them in Indian language. They said that we are just here to see the market potential of Armenia, how much market potential is there. We are trying to see the new business opportunities here. That is how India looks at this special relationship. Not only this, go to Central Asia. In Tajikistan, given the poverty of that country, we have given them money, loans, and constructed highways that are renamed after Indian leaders, and we have constructed their hospitals. And let us hope.
Thank you, Mr. Asturian, for your question. I want to speak about the EU membership, which you have mentioned, and Eurasian Economic Union, which we have now. Actually, we need to separate populism from realism, and this kind of EU membership, the first question is, who is waiting Armenia in the EU? Who wants to see Armenia as an EU member? I don't think, and I don't see any country in the EU which is interested to see Armenia as an EU member. And it is very long road, you know, even if there is some 1% interest, it is very long road to go and to stand EU member, because you need to do so much reforms, changes, and other things in your political and economic systems that it will take decades. And we can also find numbers of Tbilisi and Ankara. Speak with them. Ankara is waiting for it several decades, and Georgia was also waiting for a very long time, and they were asking where is our membership. So for this reason, now Armenia is challenging with its populism, its real opportunities and in Eurasian Economic Union, for which it is bringing to Armenia a lot of money, a lot of investments, just for nothing. Just for nothing. For this I am saying that small states in this region needs to treat very carefully. Even if you want to stand EU member, so shut up, do your reforms. When you will be very near 2-3 years, you can speak about it. But when you are decades far from this, and you are challenging your membership in Eurasian Economic Union without having any kind of economic alternative, so you do not have brains, or you are a great populist. And it is my opinion about this EU member. And about American investments, where to invest, where they can invest in Armenia. So Firebird, you are right. There were some kind of moment that the diasporian Armenians were going to invest in Armenia, not Americans, diasporian Armenians, which they are doing without anything. But even now we can see that this money will come as a loan. Yes, it is great that we are buying some kind of technologies, American technologies. It will bring Armenia some kind of knowledge, technologies. But what after that? Do we have this market? How we will use this all? This is some kind of questions on which we need to think about it, doing every step. And going back to our Indian partners, some comments. Actually, you were speaking about that India was trying to some kind of establish balance of power in this region. India is doing business, good business. You earned a lot of money, millions of money, so you need to mention about it as well. And this military part is also good advertisement. So Armenia is investing in your economy as well. So it has interdependence. It is not about that you are sending these weapons as a present to us for this balance of power. No, you are doing business. Thank you for cooperation. And about investments in IT, actually, I think that India is now needs this investment in India, and we are very happy to see Indians coming and working in Armenia. Thank you.
If I may continue the same idea.
I'm very sorry, but I'd like Dr. Ma to respond.
Yeah. And just a few words about the last part of the question. I think the other example of Armenia is Kyrgyzstan, but the China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railway, and it's also lack of the resources to build this railway, but after a long time negotiation, they accept the agreement that China will provide half of the China will they will fund a joint company, and half China and the other half for Kyrgyzstan's part, China will give the loans, almost 50 or 60% of the loans. But it's a we think there's a risk because always discuss about the debt trap. Okay. Okay, so I think the first example is Kyrgyzstan, about the China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railway. Yeah, and they found a solution about the loans, and but still a lot of critics about the debt trap. So it's balance. Second one I think is also about. I only give some Chinese perspectives on the. Or from Chinese part. The second part I think is about the Belt and Road Initiative cooperation. When we talk about the investment of China under the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative, we usually mainly think about the Greenland investment. But according to the China's data, besides the Greenland investment, there's also the other investment. It's very special. We call it the industrial park investment, and those kind of industrial parks will build I think it will give the hosting countries leverage to have those cooperation and rebuild and build a lot of infrastructures. I think for Armenia is kind of way. The connectivity is not only about the railway, about the road, it's also about the value chain. And for Belt and Road Initiative, I think is part of their projects. And the third one maybe is about the regional development banks, so they like EBRD, like RAB, like something like that. Yeah, that's the very simple.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Dr. Stepan, I'm, in the business sector, so I think I can answer to your question. Yes, there are promises of $1.9 billion investments in Armenia if everything goes as planned. But let me put it this way: Russia already have investments by 4.9 billion. Already they have it. It's not a promise. It's here. So those 4.9 billion now is in kind of risk because of the shift of political intentions of Armenia. So we are at high risk now because our debt is growing $1 billion per year. Over the past 8 years, our debt, international debt, has grown by 8 billion. B, it's a B. And now we're risking it by cutting the trade routes with Eurasia. But Mr. Pashinyan is saying that we are going to get rich. He has in mind the TRIPP, which is not there, and I highly doubt that it will be there, because there are a lot of issues over that thing, under whose jurisdiction it will be. No one knows, and things like that. Yes, I do sound my opinion with Dr. Meher, and help me, Dr. Meher, and answer this question. What if, you said rightly, that we have to keep the balance, right? We don't have to be biased in this thing because we are a very fragile situation. Yeah, we all understand that. But what if one of the parties, or maybe both of them, they are saying what the United States president said at once: if you're not with me, you're against me. So this means that they are putting Armenia in a situation where you have to choose. It's either it's with me or you're against me. That's the question that we will ask on the 7th of June.
Thank you very much for your question, and I will try to answer shortly. You know, it is the work of our diplomacy to implement balancing acts. But today you have mentioned what has Mr. Trump mentioned, right? But
no, I think it was Bush at that time.
yeah. But now.
Trump said it again.
Okay, whatever. But now we can see that there are some kind of changes in American and Russian relations. And there are some kind of Trump is trying to normalize its relations with the Russia. So if they are not putting you to choose, do not choose yourself. Wait, use all capabilities. If you have Russian investment in Armenia, try to have American investments as well, selling it to Russia as it is investment in Eurasian Economic Union, and go forward for Chinese investments and Indian investments and our investments. But when you are not having invitation from the EU, you are loudly speaking about it, but you know that you will have some challenges in Moscow, I think that you need to think about it twice.
Thank you. I actually have a question about India, and I really appreciate Dr. Wani's focus on the role that India has played. Some of us forget that the first Armenian newspaper ever was published in India. Some of us forget that there were people in India, like, of course, an English subject in those days, Chater, or Chaterian, probably, who was one of the creators of Hong Kong. Instead of going from Britain to Hong Kong, he just went from India to Hong Kong because he was born in India. Now, the question is the following for you, Dr. Wani. Even though you're making money, and I'm a capitalist, I want you to make money. I want everybody to make money. I want everybody to be wealthy. The question is whether India will invest not just in IT, not just in defense areas, but it invests like it used to in the past in the Armenian culture as well. At the end of the day, we are all individuals that have something to contribute. Do you see in the future closer Armenian-Indian relations at the people-to-people level, not just for pecuniary or immediate gains, but for long-term relationships? At the end of the day, that's really what matters. I'd like to hear your views, please.
I will give answer in this way. We have some scholarships from Indian Institute of Social Sciences for Central Asian students, and we are now increasing them to South Caucasus students, especially Georgia and Armenia, so that more Armenian students will come there, get educated there in different subjects, whether international relations, whether in any language, whether in any economic, like developmental economy, environmental economy, or trade economy. This can help to build a strong cultural relation. And even in Mumbai, now there are certain Armenian festivals which are being started at local level with some 15-20 people and some Armenians coming, starting those Armenian cultural festivals, celebrating these, like the Armenian Independence Day. There was a lot of news about Armenian Independence Day, even though gentleman said that it is all about business. It is not all about business. It is all about your strategical priorities. We have never been in a capitalist system. That is how India looks at the region. It was actually not only to give defense equipment in lieu of money to Armenia, but to have strong strategic partner in the region, where different nations are cooperating with each other for hegemony, like Russia, China via SCO or any other thing in Eurasia, America and EU now via global gateway, via investments endorsed by Biden and Trump administration. But India saw Armenia in South Caucasus, even though we have balanced relationship with all the Central Asian countries. We have C5+1 arrangement after 2019, every annual affair. But in South Caucasus, we saw Armenia as a strategic partner to keep the multipolar order intact. I as an academician, I as a researcher, we never saw Indian defense exports to Armenia as a business. We saw it as an opportunity to have a strategic partner in Armenia, in this South Caucasus region. Because Turkey is trying to use religion, China is trying to use its economic might, Russia is trying to use its military might, so-called before the fall of Soviet Union, its military might and everything. Energy as a reserve, energy as a tool to curtail other hegemonic influence on Armenia. So we saw Armenia as a strategic partner, not as a business partner. This is our understanding. That is why we saw in 2020 when Indian Foreign Minister visited Central Asia for some of the event. From there he came to Armenia, then went to Georgia. And second thing, to my co-panelist, we never saw Central Asia into different geographical compartments. We saw it as a geographical unit. Likewise, we also see South Caucasus as a geographical unit. In 2015, when our Prime Minister visited Central Asia, he visited all the 5 countries. My Central Asian colleagues know it very well. This was to give equal preference to every country. Not only Kazakhstan have the sources, uranium and hydrocarbon sources, and Uzbekistan have hydrocarbon sources, not only because of the resources and other things. We want to see them as equals. Even though there is another prospect of this relationship. In hegemony theory, there is hedging. Central Asians after 2015 have pushed back. Not only China and Russia, but now they are also pushing back USA under Trump administration. They went to Washington, they came back, and 2 days back, after 2 days, both Kazakhstan president and Uzbekistan president went to Russia to meet Putin recently. So you have to hedge back if you see there is no feasibility of the relationship. Hedging is important. For these smaller countries, hedging is important. If you are not getting your strategic and economic interests sufficed, you will hedge. You will go to China, you will go to USA, you will go to Russia, you will even go to India. So it was under that hedging, Armenia saw an opportunity. Because, see, I will tell gentlemen why Armenia saw the opportunity. Because most of the equipment which Pakistan uses is coming from Turkey, drones and the missile system and everything. Now, it is time and tested that India has defense equipment which can destroy Pakistani defense equipment. So if my co-panelists I have some of the data that how my defense equipment was transported to Azerbaijan, not only from Turkey but also from Pakistan. So this is how we work. But culture, to develop a strong cultural and civilizational relation, India is starting to have some cultural festivals where they try to highlight Armenian culture, society. Maybe in next 2 or 3 years, you will see most of the Bollywood crews coming in Armenia to have Bollywood film shooted here, like we were going to Turkey. And still India never see itself as a hegemon. We always see ourselves as a soft power. We have never invaded any country in the history. And our foreign policy is based on our civilizational glory. That is why, even though we took steps slow and steadily, because time tests our steps. We started Chabhar port in 2018. Now, my Central Asian partners here, they will say, we celebrate Chabhar Day in India, and most of the Central Asian countries send their representatives. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, they send their representatives to Mumbai to celebrate the Chabhar Day. Thank you.
I will, with Naira's permission, I will ask a last question, and then. Okay, well, somebody has to go to the microphone. Please go ahead. Okay, if we can hear you, it's fine.
I'm going to do something you're going to hate, because this should be a mini speech rather than a question.
Whoa. Okay.
I'm looking for approval and encouragement, of which there is none at this stage.
Spare us.
Indeed. Okay. Look, first, I think
we owe you love.
We really should say that this is a fantastic conference, and the range of perspective is magnificent. So I think this is incredibly enriching for us. Yeah, and what that does is prompt yet more discussion, more questions. All right, and a couple of things, please, that I would like to say. European Union. Last year, I had the privilege of speaking to the Yerevan Dialogue, which was very much supported by ORF, and I was asked specifically to discuss EU membership, or if there could be ranges of engagement with the EU. That's extremely important. Don't think about membership in binary terms, either or. It is not like that. It's a longer process, absolutely. But in that process, there are huge gains as you go along. So it's not as if you queue, you wait, you go through the acquis process, the chapters and so on, possibly for decades. No, as you progress, you get more and more. And I'm very pro-EU. I'm from that Brexit country, right? I have to absolutely signal that there are enormous gains in the process, and that there are societal gains. And with us attached to higher education and all of that, this is especially an area of gain. If you want to give something to society, to our students, to youth, right? These are inarguables. The EU is a fantastic provider, and you don't have to be a member to be benefiting from that. Look, it took Britain, idiotic Britain, I say that, 8 years to get back to where it was with Horizon. Right? We tried to argue in 2016 the importance of European Commission funding for higher education and for research. The balanced British media didn't want to discuss this because it couldn't find opponents on this topic, that it was just so obvious. It wasn't discussed until after the Brexit vote. And then there was a discovery that some British universities were getting more than 90% of their research funding from the European Commission. Right? If you are in the circles of the EU, you have enormous benefits. And please let me signal that to a country like Armenia. Let me move that point to this very, very important point you made about Russian investment here. I mean, that's unquestionable. There's a particular date in all the things that we've said that has not been said, and I think it should be said. September 2013. What's about September 2013? Armenia. I'll speed ahead. November 2013, Vilnius. What happens? Big hulking Yanukovych shows up at an EU summit, and he says, I can't do it. What is it that he can't do? He can't sign the association agreement and the free trade agreement because Moscow has said, you can't. We'll also bribe you. We'll give you the money that the EU would give you. But that's what Armenia was faced with in September 2013, 2 months earlier. November 13 sparked the Maidan, right? The Revolution of Dignity. And then the Crimea crisis, the Donbass crisis, 2014, and its extension to 2022. Right? And this is one of the reasons I would argue that the EU is actually not a soft power. It can provoke incredible things through the attractiveness that it presents. And I think the EU, in that way, is a very serious threat to Moscow. Right? So Armenia backed down in 2013. Can you imagine that? You could have been on this process for more than a decade already. So yeah, Russia is here. But Russia is here because it had an easy game for over 3 decades, quite apart from the Soviet legacy. And to that I would add, call me anti-Russian regime. I'm not anti-Russian. I have lots of Russian friends, and it's all very, very painful. Right? But Russian investment here is what we would, I think, call strategic. I mean, it certainly benefits Moscow. I don't think Moscow acts in an altruistic way. And I had warned Nargiz that I might mention something. We were on a panel in Bishkek many, many years ago, and it was about the Eurasian Economic Union, and one of the points being made is, what are the mechanisms for dispute, for arbitration among countries? You need that in a genuine free trading agreement. You need that, especially the smaller countries. Look at the asymmetric arrangement between a Russia and a Kyrgyzstan, right? You need something to arbitrate when there are issues. Canada-US, the biggest trade relationship in human history. We need that. And up until a year ago, we had probably the best bilateral relationship in history. Right? You need these kinds of mechanisms. Is Russia providing that? Is it a public goods provider? Right? Positive hegemons put out there for the common good. I'm afraid I don't see any of that. And what's more, you have a Russia investment here, which is in the ultra-strategic, energy, railroads, right? That's not just money for Moscow. That is incredible political influence. So you're right about those numbers. No, I'm pointing to the chap behind you. I am, sorry. It's just because he's literally behind you. So it looks like, I'm sorry, right?
What about 70% of our GDP is from Russia?
Yeah, this is an historic relationship where you didn't have the opportunity, I think, to be much more multilateral. Right? And look at the leverage now. Russia is doing to you what it started doing to Georgia in 2006. Sanction the things that matter. Your wonderful mineral water, your brandies, your agricultural produce, that leverage, the remittances. Putin says that. We'll crack down on your people. Ask the Central Asians working in Russia. The individual pressures put on them. And then digging in, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, 40% of their GDP is remittances from Russia. Right? These are negative influences. So these numbers are not neutral when we talk about the amount of Russian investment, the trading relationship. Okay? And had those agreements been signed in 2013, I think you would have seen a redirection. I would think you'd find a much happier youth. I would think, there's growth. Ushakov was making the kinds of statements that an EU trade official might. He was talking about, how much the Armenian economy had grown, ostensibly because of the Eurasian Economic Union. The very first thing I would say is, well, what would have been the economic growth anyway? Right? But I suspect it's not particularly because of the Eurasian Union. Right? But the point is, somebody like Ushakov is trying to say it matters to you. You've got leverage now because Moscow's waking up to the fact that you have choices.
Georgia's economy didn't grow.
No, Georgia's actually, there's a big compendium on the post-Soviet states. One of the people, the person who does Armenia, I think was here yesterday. Presumptuous, but I do the Georgia one. And that includes all the economic stats, right? Yeah. No,
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, believe it or not, I'd actually like to talk, but let's do it later. On India and this balancing idea. So I really appreciated that. So thank you.
Thank you for your question and comment. Thank you very much that you have mentioned that you are a country which implemented Brexit and never tried to be back to the EU. If it is so great place, so I am answering to your question or comment. Please wait. So thank you very much that you have mentioned about it. We need also to take into consideration the geopolitical place of Armenia, our neighborhood. Sorry, we are not next to France. And what is my point? We do not need to choose between Russia, EU, US, and China. We need to work with everyone. And if there is any kind of announcement which can bring threat to Armenia, we need not to do this. We can work with each other. We can do these reforms, but without shouting about it.
Thank you very much. Please, let's try not to.
A few words about that. I think that would be a good point a good place to conclude this conference, and then I'll have a few words for everybody. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor. And we discussed this with Professor Nargis yesterday. I think for China's vision for South Caucasus, there are two lines for China to look at this region. The first is the great powers relations. In this region, the topic, the great game, Russia and mainly Russia. And Sino-Russian relations is a lens to think about China, think about this region for a long time. And this is the first one. And second one is about the like the multilateral cooperation, or multilateral platforms. The BI and also like the BI and the Eurasian Economic Union as the multilateral cooperation and coordinations. Armenia and South Caucasus this is the second lens. China think about the South Caucasus. Maybe the third part is about the divided of this region, and is the third part about China's vision on this one. Yeah, that's the simple response.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Let's congratulate this panel.
Okay, I think this was a particularly long day, and I would like to thank all of my colleagues for their contributions. I have attended many conferences and organized many also. I think all the presentations here had, were consistently very good to even better, and provided much food for thought for people who are open to thinking about various issues and perspectives. There was a variety of perspectives, which was meant, that's what I wanted. Those perspectives could have been even more varied if some participants could have attended, hadn't cancelled, or hadn't disappeared at the last moment. But such is life, and it's just okay. I think we covered a lot of grounds. I would like to thank all of the moderators, including my colleague, Dr. Naira Sahagian. But I would like particularly to thank the few students of mine, very selected. They happen to be some of the best students I have had here. Yesterday it was Vahan Voskanyan. For a short while today, I believe Serena Najjar was here, and we still have a survivor, literally, over there, who is not sleeping, Annie Petrosyan. So that's good. She's made for the special forces, very clearly. Yeah, she's okay. She will make it in the selection process. So I would like to thank them for their contribution, but first and foremost, this conference couldn't have been organized without Miss Ani Khandamirian, who is over there. She has handled all kinds of issues, including issues that she didn't have to handle, such as advertising, press release, and so on, brilliantly and always with a smile. So I am deeply grateful to her. I don't want to talk too long because I could go also over the list of people to whom I am not grateful here. But that would take at least 15 minutes, I suspect. So I won't do it. I will keep it short. Thank you all, and I would like this to end up in with something I like, just 1 minute of it. Just give it. These are the best musicians, and at least you'll remember this part from this conference. Sur ce, I think we have, in view of the proliferation of the adjective strategic, for about anything and everything is becoming strategic these days. I wanted to share a secret arrangement I have with my colleagues, a strategic arrangement. We have to go to a restaurant now, so consider it as extremely strategic.
Can I have last word? Can I have last word, Professor? I want to thank you from all of our names for uniting us here in this university. I think it is also great investment in this university and for Yerevan that you brought so great names here and organized this. Thank you very much. Հայերենով հասկացողը հասկացավ. Who needed to understand, understood your great job. Thank you very much. I am proud of you.